Chapter 351. The light of dawn shone on the battlefield in the elf forest. The crowned queen of the black gold crown was not only staring at the human camp with hatred in her eyes. The many twists and turns in her life had forced her to become more mature and to think more comprehensively. The elven queen methodically gave out orders. She treated the injured, appointed a team, and sent out notices to the elven forest in order to awaken every bit of power that could be used. Ever since she returned from the Black Dragon's lair, Queen Jessie's decisive style had won the majority of the support. More and more elders and guardians had no choice but to bow their heads to her due to the pressure. Now the entire Elder Council was under her control, acting according to Jessie's will. "Thank you, leader of the Wyverns. I already know the news you brought. Now you can report to the Black Dragon Emperor. Please send my regards to Caesar, Tangerine, and Luna." The husky nodded. Although the nature of wyverns made them greedy for these delicious elves, as one of the leaders of the Blackwing clan, the mutated husky now had the ability to resist its own nature. It understood that these elves were its allies, so it quickly turned and left. Garcia Whisperwind sighed tiredly. It wasn't easy to be a dictator. Only after reaching this stage could one truly understand the difficulties of being a ruler. The direct consequence of having all the power in her hands was that she had to deal with everything personally, no matter how big or small. Every order had to be given by Garcia herself, and during wartime, her workload had more than doubled. But she could not rest. As the current pillar of the elf forest, every decision involved the lives of many people. Every step had to be taken carefully. She could not help but clench the hilt of her sword and pray that the moon god Serene could give her support. "Your Majesty." Garcia turned back and threw all the tiredness to the back of her mind. She remembered that her mother had once said that leaders could not complain, cry, or even be angry in front of their subordinate. Leaders did not have this right. That would bring more negative emotions to the people being led. She remembered it very clearly and was always alert. Caleb bowed and looked at Jessie's back. He felt a little sad. Although he was happy to see the elven forest become better and stronger, the gentle and kind elven king of the past would probably never come back. She had already removed her amiable face and put on a cruel mask, Caleb thought. "Your Majesty, the magic ordnance has been distributed. Should we attack?" Garcia nodded and said, "Caleb, we've been forced into a desperate situation at this point in the war. We can't take another step back because this is our home. The forest has been stained with blood. The war that has lasted for 7 days has cost us 3,000 lives. This does not include the severely injured and the cursed who are about to die. Do not be stingy with these magic items. This is the last battle. I cannot afford to lose another one of my people." "I understand." Caleb lowered his head and replied, "But Your Majesty, in my opinion, the most important thing now is to preserve our strength. The core area where we live has defensive formations and traps that have been passed down since ancient times. Those humans will definitely not be able to break in. I need a spectacular victory to frighten the other races outside the forest." Garcia took out a short bow that was coveted by rangers from her dimensional pocket. It was the treasure of the elves' treasury, the collection of the previous elf king. Now, she handed it to the guard leader without hesitation. "The reinforcements from the north have arrived. The humans are attacked from both sides. This is the best opportunity. They will not expect us to take the initiative to attack. Catch them off guard and let these invaders pay the price in blood." The guard leader looked at the two people who were talking and then looked at the magic bow called Scorching Sun in the Elf Queen's hand. He did not know whether to take it or not. "Don't think too much. I'm just lending it to you for this war." The Queen turned and smiled at him. The guard leader took the bow with a peace of mind. He used his fingers to strum the bowstring and enjoyed the feeling of the tension of the bowstring. Half an hour later, a silent battle began quietly. The Ent shepherds who were holding the amulet of concealment approached the patrol line of the human camp and gave life to the ancient trees around them. Their purpose was to attract the first batch of attention and test the enemy's firepower. Arrows swarmed in, and the Ent shepherds, who were nailed with arrows like hedgehogs, disappeared quickly. The alert level of the Koer army was frightening. As soon as the scattered spells and props were cleared, new soldiers immediately filled the gap. There were also wounded who were dragged to the rear to be treated by the priest. Garcia did not want to see such a battle. She stopped casting spells and held her sword tightly. She called on the divine power of Serene, the moon god, to bless her, and led the chimera to charge into the enemy's ranks. At the same time, the army of the dead commanded by Angrimo also moved quickly after noticing the abnormality. Among the skeleton soldiers, there was a deafening roar of thunder, iron balls, red light, and smoke again. The two sides had completed the encirclement of the Koer army and launched attacks at the same time, forcing them into a dangerous situation. Caesar was very frustrated. The rational part of him told him that the enemy's sudden attack could be another trap, and that he should continue to wait. However, the long tug-of-war had almost worn out his patience. He was very clear that he could not easily leave the interior of the empire. He was not worried about being ambushed in the wild, but that his top-notch subordinates, Husky and Nero, had been sent to the elven forest. Once the Black Dragon Emperor left, the enemy might directly attack his nest. However, he couldn't just keep waiting like this. It wasn't impossible for that area to really be the Pentashade Dragon's territory. If he didn't choose to go there himself, and instead sent one clan after another to investigate, he would only be wasting his strength for no reason, and would be devoured by the Pentashade dragons. Regarding this, Caesar was in a dilemma. "I can't do this anymore." The Black Dragon shook his head, and turned around to climb out of the nest and leave the Blackwing Empire. He wanted to clear his mind by ascending to the sky to empty his mind. Caesar soared in the sky above the Blackwing Empire. For the current him, the airspace of this continent was already a little narrow. He could vaguely see the rainbow in the sky after climbing to a height of 10,000 meters. This was the refraction of the astral energy projected onto the plane's barrier. In other words, the plane's barrier was already within his reach. He flew to the level where the air was thin, folded his wings, and descended in a straight line like a sharp sword. The whistling storm was cut open by his cheek. Only at this moment could Caesar feel a little relaxed. Close to the ground, he swung his tail and adjusted his wings, changing his direction again and again. The energy surging out of the fusion flames behind his wings was gradually reduced. The Black Dragon spread his wings like a triangular sail in a storm. Suddenly, the force exerted on his wings dropped sharply, and the Black Dragon's body glided close to the ground. With his mind clearer, he reflected on everything that had happened in the past half a month. Now, he could confirm that the enemy was the Pentashade dragons and the human army of Kaul. However, Caesar did not know what the enemy's goal was. Were they trying to attack him, or were they trying to do something else? Perhaps he should take the initiative to reveal some openings that could be salvaged to investigate the enemy's true intentions? Caesar thought. At this moment, he suddenly realized that the wyvern leader, Husky, had returned from the elven forest. He had been chased back by Nero. The demon hound leader wanted to complete the hunting mission alone. Husky's return gave Caesar more leverage. Now that the Empire had a legendary tier beast residing in it, he could do something he wanted to do: go to the southwest and investigate the places where the clans had disappeared one after another. Chapter 352. In fact, many people did not know that although Caesar did not have the ability to cast spells, when his psionic energy grew to a certain level, he could also perform many operations that could only be done by magic, such as backtracking time. After arriving at the west side alone, Caesar followed the clues and found the location where the battle had taken place. he used his psionic energy to begin to observe the scene that had happened in this place before. Soon, the black dragon found what he wanted. A Knoll tribe had been stationed here, and then a red dragon descended from the sky, stirring up a cloud of dust and smoke. After the red dragon landed, he looked around at the Knolls who were in a state of alert, smiled coldly, raised his claws, and an unparalleled burning domain erupted. When the wave of light flashed, the Knolls who had tried their best to resist had already been turned into ashes. Caesar grinned and stopped his psionic energy output. His mind was still filled with the scene of the red dragon descending with a roar. "Kadozi!" Caesar chuckled, but his expression immediately turned ferocious. "I once gave you a way out, but I didn't expect you to act so recklessly. How dare you?" This ancient red dragon had been captured by him during the First War of the Dragons, but at that time, Caesar did not get rid of this old guy. Instead, he allowed him to escape after a period of time. He did not expect this guy to come back now. "You're all courting death." The black dragon shook his head, and his psionic energy surged. He did not use the necessary means of hiding his form and avoiding detection. Instead, he leaned on the position to search, wanting to find his target as soon as possible. In this case, as long as the ancient red dragon was still in this area, and as long as it did not run far away, it would be discovered by Caesar. Boom! The next second, the black dragon moved. This terrible monster was extremely terrifying when it accelerated at full speed. When a small air explosion was heard, the black dragon had already appeared in the sky, sweeping over the earth at a speed equal to the speed of sound. An imperceptible seismic wave swept across the earth's crust. The shaking was not even enough to spill the water in the cup, but it was still caught by Caesar, who was shuttling back and forth. Because the frequency of the earthquake was too high, it appeared more than 10 times in just a few seconds. Caesar knew that while he was searching for Kadozi, Kadozi had also discovered him. After all, as a legendary ancient red dragon, he still had the ability to do so. The red crack on the black dragon's chest shone brightly, and he was even faster. Caesar flew close to the low hills, and the terrain get lower and lower. Finally, he saw a sparkling lake. The lake's reflection was a brilliant red, like flowing sunset. Dustless land. When the nearly 40 meters tall black dragon arrived, it set off a hurricane, and the lake water could not help but churn. Caesar did not hesitate at all. First, he used dustless land to eliminate all possible magic in this area. Then, he looked down at the lake and said, "Come out." Kadozi, who was hiding at the bottom of the lake, had a gloomy face. In order not to be discovered so quickly, he chose to hide in the water area that the red dragon disliked the most. When he noticed that the black dragon emperor was searching for him, he immediately began to construct a teleportation spell to escape. He did not expect that the black dragon emperor would be so fast. It was almost a moment before he arrived, and his casting was forcibly interrupted. There was no point in hiding anymore. The pride of the red dragon emperor made him unable to become a coward. The red glow on the lake gradually grew bigger, and finally, the ancient red dragon emperor emerged from the bottom of the lake. Water splashed from his body, and the bright red scales reflected a brilliant arc of light. Kadozi had reached the maximum size of the red dragon iradia, 45 meters. However, the black dragon emperor in front of him was bigger and stronger than him. The moment he saw Caesar Tangerine, Kadozi was deeply shocked. He was willing to guarantee with his life that the last time he saw this guy, the black dragon emperor, was not like this. Those metallic scales were so black that they did not pass through any light, and they had the same pitch-black almond-shaped pupils. However, at the center of each scale, there was a radially protruding surface embedded with golden threads thinner than hair. When the black dragon floated above the lake, these thin and invisible golden threads looked like melted and flowing gold. "Dark dragon?" Kadozi mumbled incoherently. Then, He looked at the huge body of the Black Dragon Emperor that had grown to 50 meters. He could not help but feel his heart palpitate. Alex must be dreaming. How could they be a match for this monster? Caesar's suppressive power was suffocating. Cadozi's fighting spirit had already dwindled to the freezing point. He was already no match for the Black Dragon Emperor before, and now, it was even more impossible. However, he still had to muster up his courage and prepare for a battle. Now, he could only hope that the mother of evil dragons, Tiamat, would help Alex complete his plan. When a living creature died, its soul would be swept into the mighty Styx River and followed by thousands of dead people in the endless realms into the underworld, the territory of the god of death, Cranwell. Although the king of the dead in the Order camp only had 2 clergies, Death and Dead, he was one of the few powerful gods in the endless realms. Mortals who were afraid of death respectfully called him the Judge. This lawful and neutral god carried out his duties meticulously. From thousands of souls pouring into the underworld every day, he selected arrogant non-believers and contemptible false believers like Caesar and nailed them to the wall of non-believers as a warning to mortals from the thousands of souls that poured into the underworld every day. The rest of the souls would be returned to the messengers of different gods according to the different beliefs they had when they were alive, and then they would go to their respective god kingdoms. Then, their respective gods would decide whether to let them stay in their god kingdoms or to rebuild their bodies so that they could obtain a new life. Mortals gave faith, and gods gave eternal life in return. This was the basic structure that maintained the gods' rule over the endless realms. It was also the root of the gods' ability to absorb endless faith to maintain their strength. For an ancient red dragon like Cados, even if it was just a shallow belief, Tiamat would not give up easily. Of course, this guy was also very clear about this fact, so when he faced the Black Dragon, he would have a slight chance, and this chance would come from rebirth. But the next words of the Black Dragon Emperor dispelled Cados' thoughts. "You want to fight, Cados? You want to die here?" Caesar smiled and said, "Unfortunately, I won't let you do as you wish." He had done a lot of in-depth research on gods, and he was very familiar with the ecological structure of God's believers. So, when Cados surged the magic in his body, he knew what Cados was thinking. The Black Dragon looked down at the gradually uneasy Red Dragon and said, "You have placed your hopes on Tiamat, and now I will call her by her real name. Let's see if that disappointing 5-headed dragon can come and save you." Having grown to this point, Caesar was no longer afraid of the evil dragon mother in the main material plane. Unless he really crossed the world wall and went down to the lower realm, if he just descended as an apostle, Tiamat would probably be smashed by him. The Black Dragon's words became colder and colder. "Next, I will blind your eyes, tear your wings, twist your limbs, break your ribs, and even pull out your tongue. But you will not die. You will be locked in the dungeon of the Black Wing Palace, and every day, your magic will be sucked and your blood will be drained. You will be tortured until you naturally die of old age. You are the devil." Of course, looking at the already furious Red Dragon, Caesar changed the topic. "You have another choice." Chapter 353. Of course, Caesar was not a dragon. As an abomination left behind from the ancient times, all dragons possessed the power of a true god when they reached adulthood. There were probably no more than 50 of them in the entire astral plane. It was impossible to find one in the prime material plane like Iradia. The Black Dragon Emperor's body had undergone some changes after igniting the fusion fire. It was gradually approaching the dragon. In terms of power, the difference between the two was more than one level. After a brief moment of shock, Cados quickly understood this point. If this guy was really a dragon, Tiamat would not dare to provoke him. It would be more likely for him to provoke Tiamat. But even so, the current Caesar was not someone an ancient red dragon could fight against. This guy was growing at an astonishing speed. Now that he was standing at the peak of the legendary realm, it would not be difficult for him to kill a legendary red dragon in a 1v1 situation. Cadeaux knew very well that Caesar Tangerine's threat was not empty. "What do you want?" he asked. "You have harassed my territory, killed my servants, and challenged my dignity. Any one of these can put you to death." The black dragon raised its head, and its oppressive aura was obvious. "But now I'll give you a chance to live. Now, submit to me and tell me what the Péniché dragons are after and where they are." Without waiting for Cadeaux to answer, Caesar added, "Don't try to fool me. Alex can't save you, Tiamat can't save you, and no one in Iradia can save you." Caesar's words were reasonable, but Cadeaux felt as if a basin of boiling oil had been poured on him. His bright red dragon scales were crackling nonstop, and his whole body could not help but tremble. Since ancient times, there were very few red dragons in the endless realms who would submit to a black dragon. The black and white dragons were actually looked down upon by the color dragons. They were not respected at all. Sooner or later, you will suffer the consequences of your risky coercion. Cadeaux cursed in his heart, but his face darkened. He gave in to Caesar and said, "I am willing to submit." "All right, tell me what you know next." "The reason I am here is purely because of Alex's mission. She hopes to lure the Black Dragon Emperor out of his nest and attack his territory. This is also the reason why Khal's army is attacking the Elven Forest." Cadeaux took a deep breath and told everyone about their strategy and deployment. There was no way he could lie about something like this. "In fact, other than the Péniché dragons and Kohler, we have a third army. But even I don't know where they are or what they are planning to do. The evil Dragon Mother has formed an alliance with the god of hunting and the god of war." "Take me there," the black dragon roared. Caesar did not intend to return the moment he learned of his opponent's comprehensive plan. That was because the psionic link he left in the court did not send any unusual information. This meant that Alex had not had the time to attack his territory. Now, he wanted to tear apart the Pentashades' lair first. In the explosion of the dragon's might, the pressure on Cadeaux's shoulders increased, and he became even more convinced that he could not resist. He used a transformation spell to turn into a red thread and hung on the black dragon's scales. The black dragon flapped its wings and flew away with the help of the chaotic energy brought by the fusion fire. They did not talk much during the whole process, but Cadeaux was not an idiot. He knew that Tangerine was extremely fast, and now that Tangerine was in a state of rage, Cadeaux would not be able to catch up to him no matter how fast he was. He might even be hammered by Tangerine, so he might as well use this method to save time. Boom! Leaving the hustle and bustle behind, the black dragon glided across the surface of the earth at a speed close to the speed of sound. 20 minutes later, Caesar landed in the middle of a broken wall, causing a small explosion. This was the predetermined location that Cadeaux had given him. "Is this the Alex Palace you were talking about?" Caesar stared at the surrounding scene and asked with his head lowered. He didn't build the ruins early on, but it had always been like this. The yellow sand covered the ruins of the buildings, and there were no traces of life in the vicinity of this area. Cadeaux returned to his dragon form after experiencing the extreme speed. The sudden stop from the speed of sound made the red dragon feel quite uncomfortable. He turned around to look at his surroundings and found that there were indeed only 2 dragons in this huge domain. "How is this possible?" Cadeaux murmured. 2 days ago, this place was still the settlement of the Péniché dragons. Alex stood on the sand tower and promised him benefits after he succeeded. But now everything was gone. Caesar took a deep look at him. After making sure that he did not seem to be lying, he grabbed a stone pillar with his huge claw and studied it carefully. He used his psionic energy to turn back time. Although the Péniché dragons had done a lot of work to cover up the aftermath, he still saw some clues. "They moved to another place after you left." The black dragon laughed gloomily. But Alex did not want to tell you that they abandoned you, idiot. Cadeaux turned around and remained silent. The one who understood the pentashade dragons the most was none other than their ancestor, Tiamat. She had long known that the ancient red dragons would give in and betray her under the threat of Caesar. From the very beginning, she had never placed her hopes on Cadeaux. She had moved the gathering place one step ahead of time to avoid the surprise attack of the heterochromatic dragons. "Let's go, captive." Caesar's hunting instinct made him feel a little uneasy. He subconsciously felt that the Empire might be in trouble, so he planned to return immediately. "I'm afraid it won't be that easy," Cadeaux said softly. When Caesar turned around to look at him, the red dragon was already in a defensive posture. Caesar originally thought that this guy was going to fight with him because of the arrival of Tiamat's apostle, but he soon found that it was not the case. The legendary red dragon bent his back, but his target was not him. The yellow sand was blowing and the wind was getting stronger. Figures appeared from the bottom of the yellow sand. They were very large in size and they were as tough as bones. However, their shapes were different. They looked like chimeras that were randomly put together, but their bodies were made of metal. "What are these?" Caesar asked. "Chimeras, the otherworldly weapons given to Alex by the evil dragon mother. I thought she only made a dozen of them, but I didn't expect there to be so many of them." The red dragon's voice was unexpectedly serious. The chimeras glided forward quietly, and there was no breath of life leaking out. Because of this, they were not discovered by Caesar at first. They were buried in the yellow sand and hibernating. At the same time, the magic seals in the surroundings lit up, and magic power intertwined into a net, covering the whole sky. This was a trap set by the pentashade dragons, and everything in it would be strangled. If it weren't for these magical imprints, Cadeaux might have become the main force fighting against Caesar. However, these indiscriminate imprints that were emitting terrifying energy waves had made him completely desperate. He had no choice but to stand together with the mutated black dragon and fight to the death. Chapter 354. It was too quiet. There were synthetic golems everywhere, but only the breath of the two dragons echoed in the air. The enemies glided silently, giving people a sense of horror as if they were about to meet the Grim Reaper who was about to take their lives. Cadeaux remained vigilant. These golems and the magic seals flying all over the sky gave the red dragon considerable pressure. The red dragon activated the burning domain and began to enchant itself with burning blood. It said to Caesar, "Your inference is right. The Dragon Queen has abandoned me. Alex is making a last stand. She has set up an inescapable net here and is only waiting for me to bring you back." Caesar narrowed his eyes and carefully examined the magic seals floating in the air, evaluating the combat ability of the synthetic golems. 20 minutes ago, he had already used the dustless land once. Perhaps it was already within Alex's calculations. None of this was a problem, but what surprised Caesar was that although the legendary ancient dragon Cadeaux was not necessarily the strongest red dragon in Eladia, he was probably not far from it. Yet, he had been given up just like that. Perhaps Alex had enough cards in her hands, but Caesar knew that he did not have the courage to do so. The wandering thought flashed through his mind, but it did not prevent Caesar from instantly inspecting all the synthetic golems. The combat ability assessment device determined that the combat ability of these synthetic golems was slightly weaker than that of the legendary human beings. However, they still had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. It was possible for ants to form a mountain and kill an elephant. "I guess these are not all. If you can get out of here, I'm afraid there are more things waiting for you outside," Cadeaux kindly reminded him. "I'm very confused." Caesar glanced at the red dragon and shifted his gaze to the synthetic golems. "Why didn't you choose to besiege me with these guys? If you are loyal to the evil dragon mother, even if you die here, you can still be resurrected in the divine kingdom, right?" "Maybe," Cadeaux said, Although the evil Dragon Mother's clergy includes conspiracy and betrayal, in fact, the Dragon Queen will not tolerate any disobedience and betrayal. Although I have successfully led you into a trap, in the eyes of Her Majesty, it is still a betrayal. I'm afraid she will not give me a second chance. I can only place my hope on your side and never enter the astral plane and hide in Iradia." In the end, there was a hint of sadness in the Red Dragon's tone. "What a wise choice." Caesar suddenly smiled. The next moment, the synthetic golem had already rushed up to him. In an instant, countless sharp bayonets smashed into the scales, turning into spinning drills that desperately drilled into the golem. 137 synthetic golems, 536 spell core marks, and more than 1,000 spell sequences and spell models. I think such a force should be enough to wipe out a small country in the central region. It is not something that a lone creature can deal with. The only way I can think of is to rely on the teleportation spell to get out of this area, but it will take some time to prepare, Cadeau said sincerely. At the moment of life and death, even the careless Red Dragon could not help but start to think quickly. "That's not necessary," the Black Dragon said in a decisive tone. "What Alex wants is for me to exhaust my power here, and then she will come out and finish the job, right? Then I will do as she wishes. Let's see if she dares to come in the end." In the next moment, more than 100 offensive spells and magic spears fell on the place where Caesar was standing. This guy's body was so huge that there was no need to lock on to him at all. When the attacks fell, the ground was abruptly reduced by half a meter. Although the golems did not speak, they actually had souls in their bodies. Their commanders knew that such a blow was not enough to defeat a strong enemy, so they immediately activated a talent inscribed on their bodies. The synthetic golems with various weapons in their hands spread out neatly in a neat formation. The distance between each other allowed them to fight together, and they would not be killed by the Yoi attacks all at once. Therefore, when the chain lightning bolts burst out from the ground, they had enough space to dodge. The Black Dragon raised his neck, and the lightning bolts converged into one and rushed towards the golems. The golems also had excellent judgment in the face of danger. They tried their best to dodge the lightning bolts at the edge of the lightning bolts, while the golems that were completely engulfed by the lightning bolts did not take a step back. They used their tough bodies to completely block the lightning bolt. The lightning bolts jumped from one golem to another, and the golems trembled violently. The surface of the golems' carapaces was heated to a red color. For living creatures, no matter how tenacious their will was, they could not stand up when half of their bodies were turned into charcoal. However, these golems could. They were still attacking. I saw it. These golems have a segmented structure. Each part has an independent control unit, so even if they are fatally injured, their movements will not be affected. The Red Dragon spread its wings and soared into the sky, using the largest amount of dragon flames to annihilate the two golems into ashes. "Only like this can we kill them, but it's too difficult." Kardaz's attack succeeded, but it was immediately forced back by the following spells. When the golems saw that it had retreated to Caesar's side, they did not chase after it. Rays of light surged one after another, and various kinds of enhancement talents were applied on their bodies. These golems had the strength to tear apart trolls, their footsteps were as light as birds, their senses were as sharp as cunning foxes, and their magic resistance was almost equal to the Black Dragon's body. Unfortunately, in the face of absolute power, these things were not worth mentioning at all. The earth trembled slightly. The Black Dragon flapped its dragon wings, and at the same time raised a cloud of dust. However, the dust was quickly swept away by the wind rolled up by the energy. This huge monster floated slightly in the air, overlooking everything on the battlefield. The Red Dragon Kardaz had previously judged that the synthetic golems in this place could destroy a small country. However, what it did not know was that this was a piece of cake for Caesar. This black dragon who had ignited the fusion fire might not be the strongest in Iradia, but it was definitely one of the most terrifying monsters. This guy was a nuclear weapon. Caesar lowered its huge head and said, "Annihilation." Even after so many years and growing to this size, this black dragon still had its sneaky nature. Although its mouth was very loud and full of vigor, in fact, this time it had only absorbed a part of the fusion fire's energy. The fusion breath it created could only be described as careless, but even so, the fusion breath still formed a 120-degree fan and then swept across the whole area. Although the magic could protect the body, it was useless in front of Caesar's flames. The extremely strong and inextinguishable flames burned on the surface of these golems. When Caesar finished the indiscriminate breath that lasted for 3 minutes, there was only melted rock in front of him. Caesar lowered his head and shouted to the red dragon, completely ignoring the red dragon's shocked and frightened eyes, "Cardas, destroy the magic core that prevented me from leaving." Chapter 355. Cados helped the black dragon crack some of the core magic imprints, but they still did not leave. After the synthetic golems were all destroyed, the law of no-fly zone was still there. No matter how much supernatural power or wings they used, they could not fly more than 20 meters above the ground. Caesar could use his powerful psionic energy to destroy this field, but he did not do so. In the eyes of the black dragon, these were all meaningless tricks. The law of no-fly zone might have a great impact on some wyverns, but it did not hinder him at all. This guy's fighting style was completely different from that of ordinary dragons. After walking a little further, Caesar saw another line of defense of Alec. Some dragon-teeth soldiers were waiting quietly. The leader was holding a long sword. He was very tall and strong, like a titan wearing dragon skin. There were only 5 dragon-teeth soldiers. The commander and his 4 subordinates were neither excited nor angry. The dragon power of the red dragon and the black dragon did not affect them. Silence was their only expression. Caesar glanced at the red dragon, who was playing the role of being surprised again. He knew that it had something to say, so he asked, "You seem to be very surprised." Dragon-teeth soldiers. Cados asked, "Have you ever seen dragon-teeth soldiers?" "No." "Neither have I." Cados shook its head. "In the inheritance of the red dragon, there is a way to make dragon-teeth soldiers, but no matter how hard I try, it is difficult to succeed. Since I was born, I have never seen dragon-teeth soldiers." "What do you mean?" "The true dragons of the Iradia generation do not have the ability to make dragon-teeth soldiers at all. I mean, these dragon-teeth soldiers are from the previous era, which means at least 1,000 years ago." "Then you are really weak. No wonder you are being chased by humans everywhere," Caesar sarcastically said. Then he asked, "Will these dragon-teeth soldiers grow with time?" "Yes." Cados nodded. "They are the most powerful subordinates of the true dragons of the astral plane." The 2 dragons communicated with each other and pointed at the enemy, while the 4 Dragonfang soldiers remained motionless like stone statues. "Don't tell me you are afraid of these vassals, these things made by the teeth of dragons." "A little." Cadozi did not care about Caesar's sarcasm at all. The red dragon's pride seemed to have disappeared at this moment. It stretched out its claws and summoned 6 fire slaves. It frowned and let these fire elementals attack to test the waters. Fire slaves were the common name for fire elemental giants in the material world. They were 3 meters tall and had a pair of illusory elemental wings on their back. Their arms, backs, and long tails were all covered with solid armor. The pair of curved horns on their heads made them look very mighty. They were the backbone of the fire elemental realm, and they were generally the main soldiers and commanders of the battlefield. Under Cadozi's command, the fire elemental giants used their spell-like abilities to create several rows of flame walls, blocking the view of the dragon-teeth soldiers. Then, in less than a millisecond, the fire elemental giants jumped out from behind the flame walls and launched an attack. On the other side, the leader of the dragon-teeth soldiers waved his sword, and the 4 squires under him immediately went to fight. The weapons they used were huge double-sided blades that were 10 meters long and 5 meters wide. Such weapons were more suitable for slashing than stabbing. The huge blades accurately found the real bodies of the fire elemental giants and let them pass through their bodies. When the blades touched the bodies of the fire elemental giants were completely defeated. They let out a cry and disappeared instantly. In just 10 seconds, the huge blades destroyed all the resistance, and the fire elemental giants were all turned into ashes. Kadozi raised his head and looked at the black dragon. The 5 dragon-teeth soldiers were unearthed from an unknown place. The power in their weapons was enough to cause fatal injuries. At the same time, they were immune to burns, deterrence, pain, and paralysis. Their resistance to electricity, acid, and ice was also maxed out. The red dragon originally wanted to ask if he should consider using powerful single-target spells to defeat these troublesome fellows, but he didn't expect the black dragon emperor to let out an excited growl, change his standing posture to a crouching position, and reveal his fangs. Looking at this posture, Kadozi knew that the red dragon next to him wanted to fight hand-to-hand because it had been defeated by Caesar like this before. The red dragon said something that no other red dragon would say, "I hate close combat." Before it could finish its words, the red dragon's thick body turned into a hissing sound. A huge blade pierced through the dragon's neck and windpipe. One of the huge blades cut off the claws that were supporting itself on the ground, and the other one cut into the heart from both sides. The dragon-teeth commander's sword directly pierced through the skull. The speed of the dragon-teeth soldiers was too fast for Caesar to see. When Caesar realized that he was not their target, they silently appeared in 4 directions of the noisy red dragon, raised their swords, and slashed. Dead? Caesar glanced at the dragon's stiff and motionless body. There won't be a next time. The red dragon's voice appeared in the battlefield again, and then the explosion of flames blasted the enemies 20 meters away. The red dragon reappeared from the demiplane. This 1,000-year-old dragon would not die so easily, but it was still forced to use some of its trump cards. Caesar noticed that the strength of its magic power had decreased by more than 1 level. The dragon-teeth soldiers with fearless bodies had just dispersed the flames when they saw a bright black claw that was getting bigger and bigger. Boom! The black dragon's attack missed, and a shockwave spread out. The shockwave swept out, and the 2 dragon-teeth soldiers of the target attacked at the same time, intertwining with brilliant and fatal sparks. The strength of the enhanced growth armor was completely superior to the enemy's derivative giant blade, but the dragon-teeth soldiers' weapons had a series of powerful attributes such as weapon specialization, extraordinary willpower, thirst for blood, strong attack, and weakness finding, so these dragon-teeth soldiers had the same precise judgment, attack rhythm, and footwork as a legendary sword saint. Their 1,000 years of combat experience was more than 1 level ahead of the black dragon. It was hard to imagine that these dragon fangs could actually fight against their creator, the true dragon. However, it was actually happening. Moreover, their opponent was the most terrifying evil dragon emperor in Eladia. If it were a normal dragon, they would have been chopped into pieces. Caesar did not have the unnecessary pride of the true dragon, so he did not feel humiliated when fighting with these dragon-teeth soldiers. He was very curious where Alex found such powerful dragon-teeth soldiers. He also wanted to have one. The dragon-teeth soldier that was 15 meters tall and as swift as a shadow slashed the black dragon's side. If it was a normal weapon, it would have collapsed. He stuck close to the black dragon's body and cut horizontally, almost taking away the black dragon's wings. His left foot stepped forward, and once again suppressed the black dragon's sharp claws. Battle instinct and countless experience told the dragon-teeth soldiers that if they repeatedly hit this position 20 times, they would be able to tear apart the monster's defense, and then have a taste of blood. But they also knew that the true dragon this time was not a fool, and would definitely have a follow-up move, so they had to be careful. Caesar's claws suddenly burst with psionic power, which turned into a weapon to bind and lock the enemy. Unfortunately, the dragon teeth soldiers were not sword saints, so they did not hold on to their weapons. The soldier with a pale and cold face easily let go of the sword, and at the same time, bowed and punched the black dragon's chest armor. He was confident that this punch could damage the black dragon's muscles. The fancy patterns on the chest were just decorations, and could not block the punch. If these dragon teeth soldiers went to the technological dimension for 2 years, they would know one thing: do not touch nuclear weapons easily. When the finger bone with divine power touched the scales on the black dragon's chest, the dragon teeth soldier's unchanging expression finally showed some surprise. It seemed that he wanted to show a shocked expression, but in the next second, his body had collapsed into colorful spots of light. Divine power? When the fusion fire was activated and destroyed the dragon teeth soldier, Caesar found something strange. Chapter 356. The remaining 4 dragon teeth soldiers were constantly moving around and healing themselves. They seemed to be able to fight well with the black dragon. Their giant swords drew a rigid trajectory on the battlefield, and they attacked and retreated like the wind. But when Caesar got tired of playing, he no longer relied on his body and fighting skills. Instead, he poured terrifying energy into the dragon teeth soldiers. The dragon teeth soldiers were instantly crushed and melted under the sharp claws with nuclear energy. Blood flowed out from the huge wounds on their bodies. Caesar began to walk out, but he was soon stopped by Cadeaux. He looked back at the corpses on the ground. The bodies of the dragon teeth soldiers quickly decayed and turned into dry bones. Phantoms peeled off from the broken shells. Their faces were as cold as ever, but their mouths were opening and closing, and no one knew what they were saying. Finally, their souls merged into the inconspicuous stone pillars on both sides of the battlefield. On the smooth surface of the stone pillars, carvings of the battle with the black dragon appeared. A burst of weak energy spread in all directions from the stone pillars, causing a slight vibration. Caesar nodded to show that he understood. These were not ordinary dragon teeth soldiers. He had smelled the scent of gods just now. But at this time, the black dragon did not have the desire to know and explore. He turned around and continued to move forward. The 2 dragons did not walk very fast on this path, because the domain had not been broken, and the suppression was still ongoing. Moreover, with every step they took, the suppression transmitted from the surroundings became stronger. Soon, Caesar found that his perception had been reduced by half. Occasionally, his vision would become blurry, his ears would become noisy, and his skin seemed to be covered with a layer of glue. He felt a lot slower. The enemy was still there and had not retreated. Moreover, after enough probing, they should be making their move for real. No matter how long the blockade was, there was an end to it. Alex could use spells and cannon fodder to buy time, but she would not escape. If she wanted to deal with the black dragon and kill Caesar Tangerine, this might be the only chance for the Pentashade dragons. The gray dome covered a huge area, and it looked like a good battlefield. Without the pillars and minions in the way, Alex finally showed up. Leaning on the sand tower, he looked calmly at Caesar and Cadeaux, who were walking toward him step by step, as if he was going to receive them as part of a routine meeting. Looks like your position among the Pentashade dragons isn't that great. Caesar turned his head to the side and said to Cadeaux, "It looks like their target isn't my territory, and they didn't even tell you about it." Cadeaux opened his mouth, and the sharp horns on his nose were shining brightly. He wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Alex. The ancestral blue dragon sitting on top of the sand tower said, "No, Caesar Tangerine, you are even more stupid than we thought, so we changed our mind. We will punish the traitor, crush the disobedient, and let your death be the prelude to the glory of the Pentashade dragons of Iradia." At the same time, Tiamat's shadow appeared behind Alex and gradually took shape. The 5-headed dragon queen looked down and said, I have conquered countless worlds and witnessed the light of thousands of suns. Variant dragon, you dare to disobey me!" Her Majesty Tiamat made a sound, and the wild dragon roar shook every corner of the arena. The dome was roaring, the throne was roaring, and the moon and the stars were roaring too. Sigh. Caesar sighed helplessly. Can't they just come up and fight? They have to engage in some nonsense that is destined to be useless. The ability to read minds exists for true gods. In another direction, a shadow holding a sword walked out of the darkness. He saw through the thoughts of the black dragon and said, "You mortal, if you can't wait to meet your death, I don't mind staining my sword with the blood of a variant dragon." The rumbling echoes collided under the dome. Caesar narrowed his eyes and raised his vigilance to a higher level. The god of war, Quelquizad, was the main god worshipped by the kingdom of Lackland that was destroyed by Caesar. He was also the god of the trading city-state of Kolar. "This guy is here too. I will break your bones." Finally, the god of the hunt, Malor, also appeared. "Ha!" After seeing this guy, Caesar suddenly laughed out loud, and the original murderous aura disappeared. "Sorry, black-blooded beast, I really didn't expect you to appear here. Didn't your believers already announce their withdrawal from Iradia? Are you provoking me, mortal?" The big black cat arched his back, and his bright yellow almond-shaped eyes stared ahead. "No, no, no." Caesar shook his head and his tail with a claw hook at the same time. He had a sincere look on his face as he said, "I'm not targeting you. I mean," before he could finish his sentence, Quelquizad, who had the power of the mind, already knew what this guy was going to say. "Everyone here is trash. Arrogant mortal." A sound wave swept past. The god of war was furious at the black dragon's rudeness. He grabbed his sword and pointed at the variant black dragon. "Now die." Extraordinary power, reality distortion. Every true god possessed extraordinary divine powers, just like the spells of magical creatures. There were also many types of extraordinary divine powers that were attached to the divine titles. Those who mastered the divine titles of life could use resurrection, while those who mastered the divine titles of death could wipe out large areas of life. The amount of extraordinary powers depended on the level of divinity. Demigods had 1, lesser gods had 2, intermediate gods had 3, and greater gods had 5. Some of them were common powers that could be mastered as long as one had a clergy. For example, the most commonly used, reality distortion, could be used by gods to change the landscape, create magic items, and change some laws of physics. Iradia saying that God said there must be light, so there was light originated from this. This was also a necessary ability for gods to create their own divine kingdom. In the endless realms, only true gods could control this power. Although there was no divine kingdom in the prime material plane, the effect was just as shocking. Quelquizad laid down a network in the vast desert area, restricting all spells and psionic effects of Cados and Caesar. "You still dare to provoke a true god at this time, foolish variant dragon." The violent god of war was the first to attack. The magnificent sword light split the air and slashed at the steel dragon who was fighting barehanded. However, what shocked Quelquizad was that Caesar directly stretched out his sharp claws and grabbed the sword light as if it was an exploding firework until it was extinguished in his palm. Whether it was magic, divine power, or psionic power, it was difficult to cause 100% damage to the black dragon. After coming into contact with Caesar's body, their power would be reduced to the minimum. Before this, Caesar had to familiarize himself with his increased power, regardless of whether he was facing the synthetic golems or the dragon fangs. This was because this was his first battle after igniting fusion fire. He didn't know how to use it in a funny way. But now, the situation was completely different. Caesar felt that he was facing 3 apostles of true God. He began to exploit the potential of fusion fire. The black dragon opened his mouth wide, and a wandering light beam appeared. Fusion nuclear energy shot out with the flame as the carrier. Quel'Quizad's body moved, leaving an afterimage on the spot. His position changed to the other side, but his breath turned into a sharp angle like the tip of a sword. Quel'Quizad saw that he could not get rid of the black dragon, so he teleported to the front of the black dragon. However, he did not expect the black dragon to push his steel chin down, and his breath poured in. The destructive flames that were no longer suppressed drowned the dragon and God. Chapter 357. Before the flames dissipated, the long sword repeatedly slashed at the black dragon's back 3 times. However, Quel'Quizad, who had used up all his momentum, was quickly forced back by the sharp claws that whistled through the air. The existence of the fusion fire allowed Caesar's power to increase by 1 level. However, when facing a god, even if it was only an apostle and not the real body, the black dragon did not have the overwhelming advantage that he had imagined. Moreover, there was more than one god. It was conceivable that Caesar's energy consumption would be faster than his opponent's. When the fusion fire dimmed, defeat would be a foregone conclusion. Energy elimination. Quel'Quizad used obliteration. The turbulent impact of the divine power blocked the nuclear energy released by Caesar. Almost at the same time, the Dragon Queen's breath immediately landed on the black dragon. Cracks appeared on the armor, and half of the bones were broken. Caesar's premeditated attack had failed. Alex and Cadozi fought without saying a word. In such a battlefield, their presence was as weak as a piece of paper. Even without the anti-magic territory, it was difficult for the 2 of them to participate in the battle between the mutated dragon and the 3 gods. Quel'Quizad casually extracted divine power from his own power. As the god of war, his status was higher than dragon gods like Tiamat and Bahamut. His divine power was also 1 level stronger. The influence he could exert in the main material world was greater. The god of the hunt, Mala, was around. This beast could feel that with the continuous attacks of Quel'Quizad and Tiamat, the mutated dragon's defense was gradually trembling and collapsing. The power of the mutated dragon was also affected. He was looking for opportunities to pressure Caesar while infiltrating the body of the mutated dragon. Although the result of the action was like sawing a tree with a knife, as time passed, every insignificant advantage would become the straw that broke the balance. However, at this time, Caesar still had the upper hand in the battle. Although his ghostly speed and indestructible attacks were simple, many spells were helpless against him. Even if Caesar could not release his psionic energy under the anti-magic domain, he still injured Quel'Quizad in many places. More than half of his divine spells were consumed. Meanwhile, Tiamat was also close to Caesar. The divine power of the evil dragon mother and the nuclear fusion energy were fighting in her wounds. In close combat, body size, tonnage, and strength were always the most important factors. Quel'Quizad's human body was not enough for him to compete with Caesar in terms of strength. Although his broken limbs could be recovered quickly every time, the damaged clothes of the god of war could not be recovered instantly like before. It could be guessed that under the pressure of the black dragon, Quel'Quizad did not have any spare energy to waste on this. Caesar used the horn on his head to block the falling meteorites, but did not continue to attack. His movements just now were a little obscure, and there was a slight deviation. The angle of his attack was about the width of a finger. This deviation was very small for a 40-meter dragon, but it was still caught by Caesar. With his control of his body, this was an impossible mistake. Caesar immediately checked the small movements of the black-blooded beast. The black dragon raised his head and let out a low roar. A violent wave of sharp waves washed over the entire battlefield. "It's over," the cold voice rumbled, and a dazzling halo condensed at the tip of Quel'Quizad's index finger. The cooperation of the 3 gods was seamless. After Malor successfully formed an influence on the black dragon's body, Quel'Quizad and Tiamat were ready to kill. The space and the scattered elemental fragments resonated with each other. Caesar's hunting instincts were like an alarm that had gone out of control. The gods had just activated their extraordinary divine power. There was more than one of them. An invisible lock pressed down on Caesar's back. Part of his bio-boost armor had been stripped away in the early stages of the battle, and his psionic energy was completely blocked. From the moment Quelquizad spoke to the moment the halo shot out, only the blink of an eye had passed. Caesar was still trying to determine the opponent's divine system when the halo pierced through his dragon body. The blazing divine power pierced through his chest and came out from his spine, burning all his internal organs along the way. The black dragon's huge body was like a baked bread, red and hot. Hideous cracks appeared on the surface of his armor, and dragon blood gushed out like a fountain. When the powerful divine power pierced through his chest, the bio-boost armor that he was so proud of was easily destroyed. Even the blessing of fusion fire could not save his broken body. All his internal organs were turned into meat paste. The accumulation of pain caused his mind to become clear for a moment. The speed of his thinking was maximized, and everything seemed to have slowed down. The tyrannical body began to swell, and the internal pressure pushed up the skin. Caesar used half a second to reflect. Quelquizad was suppressed by him, Tiamat was nothing to be afraid of, and Malor was a pure piece of trash. How did things end up like this? He could think of many reasons. For example, he did not expect the cooperation of the three gods to be flawless. He ignored Malor's weak curse. He could not counter Tiamat's five-colored dragon breath. He did not lead his minions and made it seem like he was fighting alone. Explosive waves of air seeped out from the crack. Caesar saw Quelquizad's body on the opposite side weaken instantly after the attack. Combined with the recovery of his body, Caesar could tell that Quelquizad no longer had any divine power projection in the main material world to attack again. Tiamat and Malor were still in good condition, and they were still eyeing him covetously. The vicious voice of the black-blooded beast floated to his ears. "I'm going to break your bones, poor scum." These gods are really annoying, Caesar thought. Unless the real bodies of the gods descended, he would not be able to pose a threat to the gods in the main material world. The feeling of being attacked passively and not being able to fight back was not good. One day, he would go to the astral world and trample on their god kingdom. Well, these guys had been complacent for long enough. Caesar took a deep breath and used all his psionic power as fuel to illuminate the mysterious sea of consciousness, ensuring that his soul would not collapse immediately. Then, he used the automatic control unit to prevent the fatal injuries on his body from worsening. Finally, super regeneration. The splattered flesh and blood no longer appeared, and the black dragon's injuries began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was an ability that Caesar had long possessed, and it would continue to evolve as he grew. However, other than the time when he faced the great wizard when he was young, no one could force the black dragon to such a state, so this ability had never been exposed. Quelquizad, who had lost most of his divine power, was shocked and angry. He did not understand why his attack, which he was confident in, was useless. Caesar demonstrated the regeneration ability of an evil being for the first time. The dripping dragon blood turned into burning flames that filled the battlefield. Light particles floated around the black dragon's mouth, and the destructive light beam shot out. Quelquizad looked at the light beam that pierced through his chest in shock. He could not believe that it could easily break through all his defenses. The surging nuclear energy poured into the apostle core, and the god of war let out a thunderous roar. He exploded on the spot, and his divine power turned into silver light spots, gathering into streams of light that escaped in all directions. Breaking through Quelquizad's defenses was so easy that it made Caesar hesitate. However, no matter what, he would not allow Quelquizad to take back his divine power. The burning flame wall formed a large net, blocking all the escape routes of the divine power. Caesar was prepared to burn them all. However, someone was one step faster than him. Tiamat waved her dragon claws, passing through the black dragon's blockade and capturing them like a cat catching a mouse. She sealed them in her own red dragon head. Then, facing Caesar's hostile gaze, the evil dragon mother actually nodded slightly at him, revealing a mysterious smile. Then, she dragged the ancestral blue dragon, Alex, away from the battlefield and disappeared immediately. At the same time, the god of the hunt, Malor, also quietly retreated. There were only 2 dragons left in the battlefield, safe and sound. Did he leave just like that? Caesar stared at the collapsed territory and magic imprints in the battlefield, somewhat confused. Chapter 358. The most annoying thing in the world was to think that you were a chess player, only to realize that you were a chess piece that had been kicked out of the game. Caesar and Quelquizad were the same. Neither of them were the main characters of this game. Tiamat was. As long as they did not descend personally, the gods would always be invincible in the main material plane. However, this did not mean that they did not suffer any losses. Fighting through the descent of the apostles was not as powerful as fighting in the gods' kingdom, and the consumption was also many times greater. Under this premise, Quelquizad became the final target of the Dragon Queen. It was true that the variant dragon Caesar Targaryen could become a great enemy in the future, but even if she went to great lengths to kill him now, Tiamat would not be able to gain anything other than venting her anger and spreading her name. Tiamat, who had lived for countless years, did not need any more brilliant battle results to increase her reputation. Compared to benefits, reputation was not worth mentioning in the eyes of the Dragon Queen. What she wanted was the divinity and authority of the god of war. If she could take over Quelquizad's kingdom when he was weak, the power of the evil dragon mother would rise to another level. In fact, long before this, Tiamat had already found the location of the god of war's kingdom. Countless powerful ancestral dragons were ready to attack. Now, the war between the gods had begun, and Malor wanted to join in to get a share of the action. Caesar did not know about the magnificent story that happened in the astral plane. He was still in the main material plane. In this short and hasty battle command, the Pentashade dragons seemed to have received the news and retreated. After losing the support of Alex and the evil dragon mother, the scattered dragons could not fight against the large number of Blackwing family members. Retreating was the best choice now. On the other hand, due to time constraints, the hound demon Nero didn't manage to complete its mission. It only managed to hunt 3 legendary skulls because the Kohler army was defeated by the combined attack of the undead and the elves. The chaos in the north disappeared without a trace in just a short day. The war had come to an end. Interesting, the ruler of the empire on which the sun never sets, Emperor Enrihil, was sitting on a plain chair with a large wine glass in his hand. After taking a sip of sake, he placed the latest intelligence report on the continent on the table and sighed. Although the Pentashade dragons and Kohler did not want to make it public, the empire on which the sun never sets still knew everything that happened in the north, as they had the strongest intelligence system on the continent. Although the birth of the otherworldling empire was novel enough, and the story of the evil dragon ruler was full of twists and turns, in front of a behemoth like the empire where the sun never sets, a mutated dragon occupying a remote place was not qualified to enter its sight. But now, the situation was completely different. The mutated dragon had once fought with the apostle of the 3 gods. Regardless of whether it won or not, it had retreated in the end. What did the 3 gods mean? The mother of evil dragons, Tiamat. After the 9-faced dragon god Io had disappeared, Tiamat and the platinum dragon god Bahamut had become the supreme dragon gods. Her name was spread throughout every world. It could be said that she was an existence that everyone knew and worshipped. Even though Tiamat was not a powerful existence in the main material world of Eladia, every time her name appeared, it was like a calamity that would cause great panic. The god of war, Quelquizad, was different from Tiamat. In Iradia, where humans held a strong position, Quelquizad's deities could be found in almost every country. The footsteps of his believers could reach every corner. He was the main god of greater divine power and was known to every household. The god of the hunt, Maler, was weaker in comparison. He did not have much say in Iradia, but there was no doubt that he was still a true god. The fact that the three gods could not take down a creature of the main material plane was like a great mockery to the name of the gods. At the same time, it was also a big news that was enough to attract attention and interest. While the major forces had only received a little news and did not know anything about the matter, Emperor Inrither had already received all the information, including the origin of the mutated dragon and the three gods, the early preparations of the pentashade dragons and Khal, and even the response of the north to the attack of the elven forest. Before this, even the trading city-states in the central region did not have detailed information about the mutated dragon Tangerine. Now its name had spread directly to the far south. Through the beginning and end of this incident, the Emperor of Evil Dragons, who was only famous in the northern region, became famous all over the world. Emperor Inrither put down the internal information of the empire and picked up a civilian newspaper. There was such a thing in the empire on which the sun never sets, but it was only circulated among the citizens and nobles. There was also information about the black dragon Tangerine in the newspaper, but the information was vague and groundless. There was a line of bold text on the cover, and the headline looked a little sensational: "The era of dragon rule is coming again." Below the headline was a portrait of the Blackwing King Tangerine. Its face was covered by a helmet, and its fangs were protruding out of its mouth. The whole picture looked very fierce. Its eyes were slightly squinted, and its expression was wild and arrogant, as if it was looking down at the people in the portrait with contempt. The most eye-catching part was its chin, which looked like a piece of red-hot iron. The portrait was very vivid. It was obviously the work of a famous artist, but Inrither did not like it. He did not like the title either. He casually threw the newspaper away, and a hand in the shadow picked it up for him. Inrither withdrew his gaze and continued to sip his wine. Gradually, a fake smile appeared on his face. Mutated dragon, the army of the empire on which the sun never sets had once entered the deep sea and set foot in the abyss and hell. Now, the country was even more powerful than before. It was not that the country did not have the ability to conquer the central and the north. If the ruler wanted to, the sun never sets could even attempt to unify the continent. But Inrither did not intend to do so. The territory of the empire on which the sun never sets was already vast enough. Expanding the territory would only create a numb and decaying country, which would collapse sooner or later. Therefore, he could tolerate the rise of the trading city-states and the establishment of the Swamp Kingdom. In his view, these were all human beings. In Iradia, dwarves were regarded as a subspecies of human. Only with a fluid and competitive system could the country's vitality be endless. The only exception was the Deep Sea Kingdom, which repeatedly courted death, could still exist because it was the training ground of the empire on which the sun never sets. Every 10 years, the empire on which the sun never sets would send troops to the Deep Sea Kingdom. They would destroy the Deep Sea Kingdom without destroying it and then return. This country needed war to maintain the strength of its army. However, the north was different. It was too far away, and it would be difficult for the influence of the empire where the sun never sets to reach that place. Most importantly, it was a country ruled by an evil dragon. The last country ruled by a dragon would have to be searched for in the history of the First Era. A threat, Inrither thought. In Iradia, dragons and humans were destined to be enemies. As the king of the continent, the sun never sets would allow another country to try to challenge its supremacy, not to mention that it was an empire of otherworldlings. Not even the slightest sign of it, not even a little bit. Chapter 359. Cadeaux, I don't want the conflict between me and the Dragon Queen to affect my relationship with the other Pentashade dragons. I know that many of the Pentashade dragons only trust the evil Dragon Mother. They are not my enemy. Caesar lowered his huge head and stood in front of the ancient red dragon Cadeaux. He looked into his eyes and said sincerely, "The Blackwing Empire needs more power. I hope that the Pentashade dragons can join us and form the Dragonmaw clan. The leaders of the clan will be my brothers, and you will have a share." The prison Cadeaux was in looked similar to a bedroom. The four walls were covered with soft spots. As a captive, the red dragon was not shackled or chained. He had not been abused in any way. At this time, the corner where the red dragon was squatting was even filled with shiny gold coins. As a prisoner, Caesar's attitude toward Cadeaux was sincere. He had not fully recovered from his injuries, but he had already appeared in front of the red dragon and persuaded him to work for him. The ancient red dragon's power and status among the Pentashade dragons were worthy of Caesar's attention. At the same time, he knew very well that Cadeaux had no way out. After the last battle, the possibility of Cadeaux betraying him and surrendering to Tiamat was very slim. "What do you want me to do?" Cadeaux swallowed a mouthful of fat meat. The red dragon's appetite was not small either. He said vaguely, "The Pentashade dragons are scattered all over Iradia. Without the evil Dragon Mother's oracle, it's very difficult to gather them. The efficiency of searching for them one by one is too low. It's okay. I believe that some true dragons will come to us one after another. You just need to be prepared." Caesar put away his smile and placed his claw on the red dragon's shoulder blade, patting it lightly. "My team of spellcasters will come later and help you strip the evil Dragon Mother's influence from its roots in your body. You have to cooperate." After saying that, Black Dragon turned around and crawled out of the prison without looking at Cadeaux's hesitant expression. It had been almost half a month since the chaos in the north had ended. In truth, Caesar did not exaggerate the threat of the enemy in the empire at the start of the war. However, it was only when the war truly began that the north truly witnessed how terrifying the enemy of the Black Dragon Emperor was. If not for the Black-Winged clan stopping the Pentashade dragons, the swarm of evil dragons would have brought calamity to the newly prosperous north. However, even so, the war had more or less affected the northern land. At the border between the Blackwing Empire and the outside world, the place where the dragons wreaked havoc had almost razed the Despair Ridge to the ground. Meanwhile, the trade route that they had painstakingly opened up had also ceased to exist due to the continuous war. The post-war reconstruction was in full swing. Caesar had also learned his lesson and strengthened his control over the surrounding areas. Outside the door, the Knoll leader Hogg was waiting silently. As soon as the Black Dragon Emperor came out, Hogg immediately went up to him and said in a somewhat urgent tone, "Your Majesty, there was an explosion at the Weapons Research Institute." The Weapons Research Institute was a place that Caesar had specially allocated to the Red Lotus Goblins. These little guys' recent goal was to improve the research of gunpowder. Caesar knew very well that although gunpowder was a very groundbreaking invention, it was actually still behind the conventional magic power of this era. Therefore, after the development of gunpowder, the evil Dragon Emperor only ordered the munitions factory to produce 50 24-pound cannons before stopping the production. This matter was temporarily put aside and allowed the Red Lotus Goblins to continue the research of highly destructive weapons. And so, these goblins were in an uproar. The saying of, "Goblin technology is shocking," that came from who knows where did it make sense. After receiving the support of the royal court and evolving through radiation, these goblins were as passionate as a madman. Their strong vitality allowed these goblins to madly test the boundaries of death. Therefore, there had been many explosions before this, but this time it was to the extent that Hogg reported it to Caesar with a serious expression. It seemed that there was a big problem there. According to Hogg's report, half of the magically enhanced weapons research institute had collapsed. More than 30 Red Lotus goblins were directly blown away and died on the spot. Fortunately, the Black Dragon Emperor had stationed holy light priests near the Weapons Research Institute. Otherwise, the casualties would have been even worse. When Caesar arrived at the Weapons Research Institute, he found that the damage was even worse than Hogg's report. A few of the main experimental rooms were completely destroyed. One of the load-bearing pillars had collapsed, and all the windows were shattered. Black blood was everywhere on the ground, all the way to the laboratory. It was probably left behind by the rescued Red Lotus goblins when they were dragged out of the laboratory. It's like being attacked by trolls. Hogg scanned the surroundings. The gnoll's sense of smell was very sensitive. There's also a strange, unpleasant smell. Nitrogen dioxide. Caesar sniffed and said in a low voice. It was a pungent, poisonous gas. However, the Blackwing clan were all poison-resistant monsters, so the possibility of being poisoned was not high. There was no need to deal with it. He pushed aside the debris at his feet and began to walk inside. When he was near the edge of the Weapons Research Institute, something in the ruins attracted Caesar's attention. He used his tail claw to pick up a bottle that looked a little out of place. Only then did he realize that it was the white wine sold in the royal city. Moreover, it had been drunk clean. These goblins were actually drinking wine while they were researching dangerous goods. Damn it. Ha, we did it! We did it! A Red Lotus goblin appeared in front of Caesar. When it saw the black dragon, it excitedly rushed over. Then, it was grabbed by Hogg. It kept twisting its body. Your Majesty, we did it! Caesar lowered his head and looked at it with a frown. What's going on? You dregs actually brought wine into the Weapons Research Institute? It's wine, it's wine. We did it. The key is the wine. The goblin was still very excited. Then, Black Dragon spat a breath of frost on its face. It was so cold that it shivered. After shivering for a while, it finally calmed down completely. Your Majesty, we did what you asked us to research. Mercury fulminate? That's the name you gave it, Your Majesty. The goblin trembled. Although it was very cold, its tone was still slightly excited. According to the enlightenment you gave us, we tried more than 300 alchemy formulas, but it was still difficult to succeed. Then, a guy went to the battle lizardmen and stole some wine. Then, we remembered that wine is also a kind of alchemy material. So, we used it as one of the raw materials to conduct a new alchemy test. The result was a success. We got the thing you were talking about. It was a kind of gray crystal or powder. When we were ready to really use it, it suddenly exploded. Is that so? Caesar thought. He didn't know how to make mercury fulminate. He just asked the Red Lotus goblins to keep experimenting with excessive amounts of nitric acid and mercury until they made gray needle-like crystals. He didn't expect that the key to the problem was the wine, which was ethanol. I need more and more professional alchemists, Caesar thought. He raised his chin and praised, well done. You really did succeed. The birth of mercury fulminate made the impact primer of the fixed bullets take shape. Simply put, it was the beginning of firearms. Chapter 360. Returning to the court, Caesar immediately began work on the design of the new machinery. In the peaceful days after the end of the war, he was not idle. On the contrary, Caesar felt that he was busier than ever. Even though Luna was about to reach adulthood, they had very little time to be alone. Apart from dealing with post-war reconstruction work, there were also many authorities that needed to be delegated to the trade route. After the breakthrough in the weapons research, Black Dragon had ordered the munitions factory to test the strength of some alchemical products and build a new smelting furnace. In the past, whether it was smelting iron or steel, it was done purely based on the experience and intuition of the Grey Dwarf. They did not know the composition of the products, which Caesar did not think should be the case. If smelting could not keep up and produce high-strength metals with excellent properties, climbing the weapon tree would only be a pipe dream. As the number of spellcasters joining the northern lands increased day by day, Caesar also had the ability to assign spellcasters to various strategic industries that the empire urgently needed. With the help of the spellcasters, the Dark Dragon possessed a method to accurately determine the composition of metals. With the help of the spellcasters, Caesar's arsenal could repeatedly compare the detailed data required for smelting. For example, the mixing time after melting, the specific amount of charcoal to be added, the need to add additives to remove sulfur scales, or the addition of other metal materials to create alloys, and so on. Based on these data, the munitions factory could conclude the standardized process of smelting, producing iron ingots or ingots of the same quality through repeated production. At the same time, the fog of material science was slowly dispelled. As the Emperor of the North, Caesar did not need to do everything himself. He only needed to give instructions, and his minions would do as he wished. Facts had proven that this was indeed the best and most efficient method, and the new smelting furnace was built for this purpose. It was a square furnace 5 meters wide and 3 meters tall, its bottom tilted to one side. Its thick outer shell was cast iron, and the inner layer was covered with clay bricks and a layer of magic coating. Its heat resistance was unquestionable, and the lowest end was equipped with a movable gate that was pulled by a steam furnace. Considering that high-class heating methods such as oxygen blowing and electric arc could not be carried out, the furnace was simply not equipped with any combustion device. At this stage, it completely relied on the flame provided by the spellcaster to smelt the molten steel. After adding the raw materials according to the test ratio and smelting the molten steel would directly flow out from the rear gate. The furnace could produce about 60 tons of molten steel at a time, and the spellcaster could complete the smelting in just half an hour. Including the time needed to feed and draw out the steel, it would only take a little more than an hour. Such output could temporarily meet the needs of the experimental production of guns and cannons. Whether or not there was a need to expand the production in the future would depend on the wishes of Emperor Black Dragon. The current smelting mode of the munitions factory was that the blast furnaces and shaft furnaces were responsible for producing large amounts of pig iron. It could be used to satisfy the daily needs of ironware and steam furnaces, and it could also be used as a deep smelting furnace to obtain wrought iron or steel. The design that Caesar was currently thinking of was a set of production equipment for the stamping of warhead. After having a stable and reliable source of steel, the stamping machine no longer had any hardware difficulties. The success of the mercury fulminate experiment made the production of new weapons even more urgent. However, if they did not rely on machine tools, it would still take a long time for a skilled worker to complete the entire process. If the stamping machine assembly line was put into production, 30 ordinary people or Black Wing family members could complete the operation after training and familiarizing themselves with the operation. Under the condition of full operation, they could produce nearly 10,000 rounds of bullets a day. The North could also skip the manual reloading of firearms and directly enter the stage of semi-automatic weapons. As long as they took this step, the Black Wing Empire would walk in front of the dwarves of the Kingdom of Swamp. The black dragon laid its neck flat on the ground and unconsciously swayed its tail. It stretched its claws to the right of its head and scratched the ground with its claws. After dinner, Caesar kept this posture until he heard the hooting of the night owls. The whole set of sketches finally had some ideas. Of course, this was only the simplest of conceptual illusions. The specific details would need the help of the Red Lotus goblins to improve. After continuous testing, it would finally take shape. If it was any other day, the lazy dragon would have already curled up its body and crawled into its soft bed to sleep. However, Caesar was in high spirits today, and did not feel sleepy at all. Luna was by his side the whole time. Until now, Caesar asked the little one to help him copy down the graffiti on the ground one by one. After putting away the paper, he asked the battle lizardmen to take out the letter from the elven forest from the display cabinet and read it together with Luna. Greetings, respected King of the Black Wing. Thank you for lending a helping hand to the elven forest when it was in danger and fighting a strong enemy with us. I am very excited and grateful for your decision. The alliance between us has become even stronger after the test. The existence of Miss Luna has allowed us to reach a consensus and coexist. It has also allowed us to become an inseparable entity. The elven forest will not forget. Because of this, we know that Miss Luna will reach adulthood in 15 days. According to the etiquette of the forest goblins, Luna may need to return to the elven forest to receive the praise of the entire tribe. I am very much looking forward to the upcoming banquet and hope that Luna will return as soon as possible. If you are willing to accompany Miss Luna to visit the elven forest, we will welcome you with open arms. We must ensure that the previous delay will not happen again. Finally, I wish you all the best, Garcia Whisperwind. Caesar closed the parchment and put it away in the display cabinet with his claws. It's time to go back. Luna yawned. The frequency at which she flapped her wings was much slower than usual. It was now late at night. The little girl's biological clock had always been quite normal. She was now very sleepy. Caesar, are you coming back with me? She asked sleepily. Of course. The black dragon said with a matter-of-fact face. I promised you last time. In the next few days, Caesar began to try to delegate his authority to Hogg, Angrimo and other core leaders to maintain the normal operations of the empire. He decided to let the Red Dragon, Kadozi, go to the West Sea to clean up the pirates and subdue the clans living on the coastal islands in the name of the Blackwing Empire. On the other hand, Caesar called back some of the Blackwing family members who were originally sent to guard the borders. These troops had recently appeared in the cities to patrol. Whether it was the transfer of Kadozi or the return of the armed forces, Caesar only wanted to ensure that the empire would not fall into chaos while he was away. The war had just ended, and he was not sure if Tiamat would follow up. However, Caesar had no choice but to take some precautions. The mother of evil dragons was worthy of her divine title of conspiracy. It was not impossible for her to make a sudden move to disgust him. Chapter 361. Back to half a month ago, the granite steps at the entrance of the elven forest were stained red with blood, and the smell of blood in the air was pungent. There were many corpses on the ground. Some belonged to the Kohr army, some were elves, some were mutants, and some were skeletons. They had all died in different ways, and most of them had been hacked apart. Broken limbs and internal organs were scattered everywhere. War was never romantic. It left only pain and cruelty. Every time Garcia stepped on a step, she would feel something sticky under her feet. In the final phase of the battle, the Kohr army's will to fight could only be described as crazy. Even when they were attacked from the front and back, they did not retreat. The soldiers at the rear used their bodies as shields to block the thunder cannons, just to give their comrades at the front line a chance to tear apart the elven forest's defense. Garcia did not understand. What was so attractive about the elven forest that made these humans fight so desperately? If it was not for the Blackwing Empire's help, the outcome of the battle would be uncertain. But we won. Garcia's heart was burning. We won in the end. The elven forest was united for the first time in hundreds of years. The Kohr army's strongest attack was not able to break through Tia's defense. She did not show any signs of weakness again. Instead, she kept her promise and retaliated with the claws and blades of the invaders. The outskirts of the elven forest were also in a mess. The ground was littered with broken branches and leaves, as well as flowing blood. The following days would be very busy. Every day was destined to be a sleepless night. The elven forest had not experienced a war for far too long. 2 palace guards walked up to her and knelt down on one knee. "Your Majesty, the rangers have finished searching the entire area. There are no traces of the enemy. You have worked hard. Get up." Garcia extended her hand in front of them and signaled them to stand up. "Bring the captives here. I have something to ask." The Corps army was indeed a rare elite force, but this did not mean that all of them would fight to the death. The elven forest eventually captured more than one captive and locked them in wooden cages in the shattered Star Lake. Not long after, the captive was brought before her. There was a circle of vines around the neck of the human soldier, with a bulge in the middle. At first glance, it looked like an ornament, but the elven rangers all knew that these vines were used to bind magic. Other than using a corresponding command spell to loosen the vines, it was very difficult to undo them. If one tried to cut the vines with a sharp weapon, the vines would immediately shrink into a ball after being injured, and their powerful strength would be enough to strangle the captive to death in an instant. This man is one of the enemy commander's subordinates. He was in charge of the retreat of the Corps army and was captured by us, the elven guard introduced. The human soldier did not say anything, but Garcia could see the mockery and disdain in his eyes. He could tell that these humans did not respect the elves. "As an invader, a loser, and a captive, I don't think you have anything to be proud of," Garcia said to him. "You should repent for your sins and beg for the forgiveness of those you have hurt. Of course, the elven forest will not forgive you. Taya will cut off your head, the eagles will tear off your limbs, and the chimeras will devour your organs to punish you for what you have done. They will let you feel the pain of war." And then, unexpectedly, the soldier said, "Crushed into powder by the army of the trading city-state. I am very confused." Garcia looked him in the eye. "The elven forest does not care about external things. We have no grudges with the Corps and the merchant city. We also have nothing that the humans covet. Why are you willing to travel thousands of miles to raise your spears at us? You will know." The soldier lowered his head. "When the Corps army returns in the name of the god of war, you will know." "The god of war?" Kasia's beautiful eyebrows twitched. "I'm afraid there won't be such a chance. Last night, my god mentioned to me that the god of war is being pursued by the mother of evil dragons. Almost half of his kingdom has fallen." The captive trembled. He was a soldier of the Corps and also a believer of the god of war. "Quelquizad above," he whispered, his eyes in a daze. There was no need to doubt the authenticity of the elf's words. In the past few days, he had been praying to the god of war day and night. However, he did not receive any response. His god did not give him any power. Early on, he had a premonition that something might have happened. Now the elf had exposed the truth. Such major events in the astral world were never a secret. "The mother of evil dragons," the soldier muttered to himself. "She was their ally, but now she had betrayed her oath." "Wake up, you can't do anything," Garcia reminded him. "Don't worry about the matters between the gods. You should cherish the chance to redeem yourself. For the last time, even if you don't tell me, someone else will tell me. Answer me, why did Corps attack us? I promise to let you die bravely without humiliation." The soldier was silent. After a while, he said, "The King of Black Wings." "What?" "Because of the King of Black Wings. Attacking the elven forest was only one part of the plan. Corps' army was in charge of the execution, while our ally was in charge of the battle on the main battlefield. He revealed the original plan and finally sighed deeply. "God of conspiracy, we have lost. His Majesty Quelquizad." Listening to the soldier's narration, Kasia slowly clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. He did not make a single sound throughout the entire process, nor did he ask any questions. However, the rage in his heart was surging, just like the guards who were listening by the side. It turned out that this war was an unexpected disaster. The enemy came because of the Blackwing Empire, and the Elven Forest was just an innocent bystander. However, they had paid the price in blood. More than 1,000 of their people had died in this invasion. Damn it. Even Garcia Whisperwind, who was highly cultured, could not help but want to curse. She could bow down to the King of Black Wings, but the elven forest was her bottom line. She could not tolerate any actions that hurt the elven forest. However, the enemy was not deliberately attracted by the Blackwing Empire. After receiving the request for help from the elven forest, the Black Dragon Emperor immediately sent Angrimo, Silly Husky, and Nero to help. Needless to say, they were the most important forces of the Blackwing Empire. After all, the North was also at war at that time. In terms of handling this matter, the Black Dragon Emperor had already taken care of the elven forest. Garcia was a little hesitant. In a situation where she was an innocent bystander, it would be unprofessional of her not to be angry as the elven queen. However, anger would not help the situation. How to deal with this problem became a difficult problem for her. Logically speaking, she should preserve Tia's dignity, angrily rebuke the Black Dragon Emperor, and cut off all relations with the Blackwing Empire. However, if she did so, it was unknown whether the King of Black Wings would be angered. In the future, if Caesar ignored Luna and launched an attack on the elven forest, how would they protect themselves? However, if she were to pretend that nothing had happened, Garcia would not be satisfied. Her people had sacrificed too much blood for this. Their sacrifice could not be in vain. The root of all this was because the Blackwing Empire was an unshakable behemoth. It was not on the same level as the elven forest. The difference in strength caused Garcia to be weaker than the Black Dragon Emperor by more than one head. She could not speak to the Black Dragon Emperor as an equal. Garcia was silent. "Your Majesty," the palace guard beside her reminded her. She had been in a daze for a long time and had not thought of a suitable solution. She came back to her senses and looked at the captive who was kneeling on the ground in silence. She said, "Kill him." When the guards were about to take the captive away, Garcia added, "Also, seal the news. Don't let the people know about this for now." After the guards left in silence with slight reluctance, she thought for a while and finally sat down to write a letter. She used the excuse of Luna's coming-of-age ceremony to invite the Black Dragon Emperor to visit the elven forest and prepared to talk to him face to face. Chapter 362. Her mother picked up a long dress and showed it to her. "How about this? Feel the material, it should fit you." Luna reached out her small hand and touched it. The dress was woven from the green leaves of Yanan flowers in the middle of summer. The material was soft as water and flowed through her fingers. The little girl showed a beautiful smile. "Is this prepared for me?" "Of course, this is Mother's gift to you," Bailanwe said dotingly. Her mother was in a particularly good mood tonight. "The color is just right for your sapphire eyes. When the time comes, you will have to wear jewelry and hairpins. You have to look like an adult." Look like an adult, Luna thought. The scene of her sneaking out of her home and bumping into the Black Dragon was still fresh in her mind. Days passed in the blink of an eye and more than 10 years had passed. She finally welcomed her coming-of-age ceremony. The name sounded grand, but in reality, the coming-of-age ceremony was a stage that every forest fairy had to go through to reach maturity. To be honest, there was nothing strange about it. In the past, when the fairies came of age, their families would hold banquets and invite their friends. There were very few outsiders who would attend. However, this time was very different. The leader of the elven forest, King Garcia Yufeng, had personally given the order to prepare Luna's coming-of-age ceremony. "Luna, you will definitely be the most dazzling pearl during the coming-of-age ceremony. But remember to remain humble." Her mother put away the clothes for her and then suddenly stopped smiling. "King Garcia is personally preparing your coming-of-age ceremony. This is a great thing. However, the war has just ended. Many races have yet to recover from the pain of the war. We cannot go against His Majesty's orders, but it is best not to hurt the hearts of other races at this time." I understand, Mother. Luna nodded. The Blackwing Empire was still better. She did not have to worry so much there. Here, she had to be careful with her words and actions and consider the feelings of others. Although this was what she should do, it would be better if she could do everything according to her own wishes. I heard that the evil dragon has come as well. How scary. Bailanwei paced around the table uneasily. The Pentachet dragon is a symbol of disaster and a synonym for chaos. Although they had seen the Black Dragon Emperor and their daughter had always been by his side safe and sound, the forest fairies still could not change their view of the Pentachet dragon. Caesar is not one. Moreover, he is King Garcia's guest this time. Nothing will happen. Luna. The Black Dragon left after sending her to the forest fairies to meet Garcia. He came as the Emperor of the Blackwing Empire. On the other side, Caesar had already appeared in front of Garcia. The Elven Forest wasn't the Blackwing Empire. There wasn't an area specially designed for him to move around. Due to the Black Dragon's body being too large, in order to communicate normally, Caesar had no choice but to swallow a necklace of transformation. Although he didn't transform his body, he still shrunk his body to a size of a few meters. And this was just to communicate with Tia. If he wanted to attend Luna's coming-of-age ceremony, he would have to shrink even smaller. Looking at Garcia's crown, Caesar grinned. Good day, Elven Queen. I see that the Elven Forest has changed. It has changed much more than I imagined. We must unite to protect ourselves. Garcia replied. That is why there will only be one voice in the Elven Forest. Good day, King of the Black Wings, Emperor of the North. You are right. The Black Dragon nodded in approval. It is because of this that you were able to defeat the foreign races and chase the invaders out of your home. This war will become an important part in the history of the Elven Forest. It will show the rise of the Elven Forest. Yes. Caesar took the initiative to bring up this topic. Garcia nodded. Of course. If not for the Black Wings Empire's help, we would not have been able to hold on. Please allow me to express our gratitude to you on behalf of the Elven Forest. She bowed in a ladylike manner. Her fair collarbone made her seem like a fairy, dignified, and full of spirit. Without waiting for the Black Dragon to speak, she continued, Can you guess where these invaders came from? Where? Kohler, a free trade city thousands of miles away from the north. I do not understand what attracted these humans to the point that they would travel thousands of miles and attack the Elven Forest without fear of death. Garcia looked at Caesar. Her eyes were as clear as crystal. Is there something in the Elven Forest that they want? Perhaps. But we have not communicated with the outside world for a long time. The Tia only have the skills left behind by their ancestors. They are things that have been eliminated in the eyes of the humans. Garcia said seriously, As the Elven Queen, I have searched the entire Elven Forest and have not found anything worth fighting for. Furthermore, the Tia do not desire war and bloodshed. If there is something that the humans need, the Free Trade City will trade with us directly. So, I guess that they have other demands. For example, to achieve a strategic goal? At this point, there was no way Caesar wouldn't understand Jessie's hidden meaning. It was obvious that she already knew Call's true intentions. The Elven Forest was just an innocent bystander that was dragged into the grudge between the three gods and the Dark Dragon. Caesar fell into silence. He really hoped that the Elven Queen would be stupid enough to not investigate the reason behind the attack on Kohler. Instead, she would vent all her hatred and anger on the humans. She would only be grateful to the Blackwing Empire for lending her a helping hand. She would then lean closer to the Blackwing Empire. However, that was not the case. After Garcia found out the whole story, he knew that the number one target was still Call. However, the Blackwing Empire would also be marked as the enemy of the Elven Forest's people. At this moment, Garcia suddenly smiled. Of course, this is just my baseless guess. There is no evidence to support it. This is just a random guess. There is no need to let everyone know. Only she knew how bitter her smile was. If she had the power to fight against the black dragon, the elven forest would not have compromised so much. They would have broken off their relationship with the Black Wings Empire without hesitation and become the Black Wings Empire's first enemy in the north. But she did not. So, in order to protect the elven forest, she had no choice but to bow to the evil dragon and force a smile. She even helped him hide the truth, and did not let her people know the true reason for the war. Once this matter was exposed, Garcia Yufeng's name would be nailed to the pillar of shame. She would be despised and cursed by countless people from the elven forest. Garcia was well aware of the consequences, but she had no choice. All she could do was to fight for the elven forest's due compensation. Caesar was not afraid of breaking off his relationship with the elven forest. The threat that the elven forest posed to him and the Black Wings Empire was almost negligible. The black dragon only cared about the feelings of Luna's parents and the forest fairies. To him, this was more important than the elven forest. So, when Garcia indicated that she did not announce the news, Caesar could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Chapter 363. The forest fairies of the elven forest were holding a grand coming-of-age ceremony. Apart from the fairies, many of the higher-ups of the elven court and the guardians were also present. There was Caleb, who was originally a noble emissary, and Magus Hill, who was part of the guardians. Even the elven queen Kasia took time out of her busy schedule to attend. To make the occasion more harmonious, Luna's coming-of-age ceremony was not held within the forest fairies. That place was too small to accommodate guests of different races. Instead, it was moved to the activity area beside the shattered Star Lake. Apart from the Elven King's opening speech, there were also musicians and poets from the Elven court present. Of course, most of the fairies did not understand the political significance of Kasia's actions. However, as long as they received the blessings of various races, it was a day worth celebrating. The banquet in the elven forest looked much more elegant than that of dragons and humans. There was no barbecue or stew. Instead, all the food was cut into small pieces and served on white porcelain plates. There was a small plate on the side with all sorts of condiments. Guests of different races could dip their food according to their taste. The drink of the elven forest was not wine, but honey nectar. Relax. Caesar held 2 cups of nectar and walked towards Luna. He had shrunk to the size of a forest fairy. His 50-centimeter body made his head and body disproportionate, and his short tail made him look charmingly naive. "This is your festival. I'm not nervous." Luna smiled with her eyes squinted. It was the first time she saw Caesar grow so big. "Come, little dragon. Cheers. But you're still smaller than me." The cups clinked slightly. The little one's eyes were filled with happiness. Caesar resisted the urge to rub her head and returned to his seat, wagging his tail. It was rare for him to be so relaxed. The forest fairies would give gifts to others during their coming-of-age ceremonies. Usually they would not give anything valuable, but there would definitely be something. In fact, there would be a little fairy holding a coming-of-age ceremony almost every year. As such, they would receive gifts once or twice a year. However, these fairies were never tired of it. The number of gifts for today's occasion was extraordinary. Garcia's appearance had attracted enough guests for Luna's family. Looking at the mountain of gift boxes, some of the immature fairies were so excited that they almost forgot to eat. Caesar also received a gift, a crystal pendant. The item was very small and not expensive. There were obvious traces of polishing on the edge of the crystal, but the string was obviously carefully woven. There was even a beautiful knot at the end of the string. When Caesar raised his head, he saw Luna winking at him, so he knew that this was a pendant made by Luna herself. He wrapped it around Meaty's paw and put it away. After all the gifts had been delivered, the banquet finally began. Everyone started singing, dancing, playing music, and playing games. Of course, meals were indispensable. There were 3 main meals for the coming-of-age ceremony, including lunch, afternoon tea, and dinner. When the lunch was generally over, it was time for the host to make a speech. The guests had a general idea of this, and kept a tolerant mood. They drank their favorite flower nectar slowly, tasted their favorite pastries in small bites, and listened attentively to the coming speech, and were ready to cheer for it. Mr. Tearope left his seat and walked to the largest and oldest tree in the shattered Star Lake. He flew up to the wooden stage decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Luna's father was not good with words, but he still gave his most sincere blessings to his daughter. The guests also gave their heartfelt applause, including Caesar. Halfway through the banquet, the elven poet stepped onto the stage and bowed. Then, he started playing his harp and played a string of notes. Luna and the other judges gave him a round of applause that wasn't too enthusiastic, but was sincere. When the poet let go of his instrument, the elves immediately sang a new song. When it was time for free activities, everyone was finally free from the shackles of etiquette. The air above the banquet was cleared, and the poets and musicians were inspired. Most of the poems were dedicated to the forest sprites and little Luna. There were also a few poets who expressed their love for Her Majesty. Amidst the celebration, the night gradually approached. The banquet had also reached its final stage. The guests competed to go up on stage and give their most sincere blessings to the main characters of the day. At the same time, they gave their hosts gifts in return. The custom of giving gifts in return was actually not bad. For the forest sprites, the gifts could be a wreath or a bottle of rose nectar. They did not care about the value of the gift, but this etiquette came from tradition. Garcia was the first to give her blessings. She gave Luna a pair of custom-made crystal high heels. The forest sprites were not allowed to wear such shoes before they reached adulthood. The gift was not expensive, and even a little unbefitting of the status of the elven queen. However, Garcia had to consider the others. The gift should not be too eye-catching and would embarrass the other guests. Chimera Magusher, the elven messenger Caleb, and the other guests went up on stage one after another and gave their gift. Their gifts included gemstones, emeralds, dragon teeth, black rocks, and other strange things. It was understandable that each race had their own customs, but the most ridiculous thing was that someone actually gave Luna a set of elegy cards. In response, the little one could only hold back her laughter and accept it. As a guest outside the elven forest, the black dragon also gave his gift. However, his gift was so different. For Luna's coming-of-age celebration, the Northern Emperor gave her 3,000 sets of refined full-body armor, 1,000 sets of steel plates, a set of crossbows and arrows, and 100 black cannons that were used in the last war. When the Black Dragon Emperor said that these things would be delivered to the elven forest within 3 days, all the guests present were dumbfounded. What followed was a dead silence. It was only after a few deep breaths that the people began to whisper amongst themselves. Everyone came to a consensus that this joke was too big and had frightened the forest sprites. However, Garcia was the only elf present who remained silent. She sat opposite the Black Dragon Emperor, ignoring all the comments and questions. Of course, these weapons and armor were not for Luna. The Black Dragon Emperor was only using this as an excuse to give these goods to the elven forest as compensation for the disaster that had befallen them. These were also the things that Garcia had wanted to ask for in a roundabout way during their conversation. Luna was stunned for a moment. After staying by Caesar's side for so long, the little one's mind had become much more active. Therefore, she quickly understood the key points and agreed with a smile. As Luna grew older, she rarely threw tantrums. She would gladly accept Caesar's gift. Even if those things weren't for her, she wouldn't be unhappy. This was because Luna was very clear about the Black Dragon's nature. The big, stupid dragon's love was straightforward. She lived in the treasury of the Blackwing Court. She could take anything she wanted in the northern lands. If she wanted something, she could just reach out and take it. Chapter 364. A shipyard by the west coast was surrounded by a crowd. The reason why it was described as one was because there was more than one shipyard on the west coast. Including the official shipyards of the royal court, there were already as many as 8. It had been almost a year since the Black Dragon Emperor issued the bounty. Ever since the high bounty was announced, countless shipbuilders flocked from all over the world to seek refuge under the Black Wing royal court. The government also gave sufficient support to the shipbuilding industry. As long as one was a qualified shipbuilder, regardless of whether they chose to do their own research or work with other masters, their applications for funds and manpower would be quickly approved. But at the same time, all participating personnel would be recorded. Every month, officials would go to each shipyard to check on their progress. Taking the money without doing anything would not work. The Empire's inspection of the progress of each shipyard was equally strict. There had already been 2 factory managers who had been hanged from the high tower at the port. Today was the day that the shipyard's new ship was launched. People crowded around the shipyard curiously. This shipyard had never announced its research projects and progress to the public, but every month it quietly passed the official inspection. What was even stranger was the scale of this shipyard. It had been constantly expanding in the past year, from the original small wooden workshop to a heavily guarded factory area. Its scale had even surpassed the shipyards built by the government. It was obvious that it had received great support from the Empire. And according to the latest news, this shipyard was building an epoch-making ship. It did not need the support of magic. Its appearance was no different from the large sailing ships sailing on the sea, but it was actually made of steel. Everyone knew that steel was no different from stone on water. If it was thrown into the water without the support of magic, there would be no trace of it other than the sound of a splash. The crowd of onlookers was roughly divided into 2 groups. One group was the tourists who had just arrived at the west coast. They were curious about the news or were in disbelief. Among them, there was no lack of merchants and sailors from the south and west. The other group was the local residents. They were not interested in the new ship, but they had heard that the ruler of the Empire might come personally. They wanted to see the traces of the Black Dragon Emperor. Croendo belonged to the former. When the officials of the West Coast posted the news and the new recruitment order on the bulletin board, he said that he had to come here to take a look no matter what. Pino, who lived with him, had no choice but to ask for leave from the owner of the shop to accompany him. They had just arrived in the north and were unfamiliar with the place. Pino was really worried about letting the old man go to a place where people gathered. Once there was a stampede, the threat to the old man would be fatal. "You underestimate me, child." The old man waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to follow him. "When I was young, I had the title of warrior. I've been through a lot. Although I'm old now, my body isn't necessarily worse than yours." Yes, Pino said disapprovingly. "Anyway, I've already applied for leave. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm the only one who applied for leave after just 5 days of work. I just don't understand. If you say you want to see the evil Dragon Emperor, I can understand. Why do you insist on seeing that thing in the water? Isn't it just a ship?" "But you said it's made of steel." Kendo shook his head. "These days, steel can float on water without the support of magic? Blame me for being talkative," Pino thought to himself. When he was chatting with the old man, he mentioned the notice on the bulletin board on the West Coast. Maybe that's just an exaggeration from the Empire. You know that the rulers like to do that. It's probably a wooden ship wrapped in a layer of iron? There's nothing new about that. Kendo's beard trembled. But think about what the reward from the Northern Court was last year. If it was something so simple, this shipyard definitely wouldn't have the support of the government. And I heard that the shipbuilder inside is a master from Nice. Pino was surprised. You seem to be very interested in this. I used to be a captain, child. The old man exhaled a breath of white air. Back then, I was a young man who longed for the sea. I carried large amounts of goods between Constellation Island and Swamp Bay, tangling with pirates and fighting monsters. 30 years ago, I came to the fjords in the north and even sailed to Vilost on the other side of the West Sea. Later, because of some things, I ended up in this state. You've never told me this. Pino's eyes widened. You've never asked either. The old man smiled and shrugged. You're a captain. Then do you have a hidden fortune or a treasure map of some pirate king? Don't joke around. Kendo shrugged. I know a little about Vilost, but the Iradia aren't interested in the other side of the sea. Even if I know, it's useless. All right. Pino turned his gaze to the shipyard. So what you're really curious about is the Empire's research and the new ship that's about to be released. No captain wouldn't be curious, because no captain doesn't love a good ship. Kendo stroked his beard. It's not that I haven't heard of ships made of steel, but without the support of magic, do you know what that means? If the rumors are true, it means that in a year or two, the Northland fleet will be able to cover the entire western coast and go anywhere they want. Pino glanced at the old man. At your age, you're not planning to go back to your old profession, are you? The old man chuckled. I can't always eat your bread for free. Pino opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but the old man's eyes suddenly lit up. He pointed to the sky. It's here. Pino looked up at the sky. A black dot was rapidly growing in size, and a strong wind suddenly blew. He hurriedly supported the old man to prevent him from falling, but he found that Kendo's body was much sturdier than he had imagined. In fact, he was even more stable than he was. There was a panic in the crowd because the huge dragon had already landed on the platform outside the shipyard. Its two front claws were on the edge of the platform, and its head was peeking out to look around. The Dragon King. The old man tugged at the corner of his shirt, indicating for him to lower his head to show respect. He muttered softly, It's much bigger than the rumors say. It's said that it can rival the gods. I think it might be true. Emperor Black Dragon did not speak. He squatted on the platform, and the person in charge of the shipyard immediately came out to greet him. Standing in front of him, he was as small as an ant. Corvette, it's him. The old man spoke again, his gaze fixed on the white-haired shipwright at the front of the line. The master of the inner sea city, Corvette Ness. This guy actually came to the Northland. No, how did you see it clearly? Pino stood on his tiptoes to look around, but he was also puzzled. With his eyesight, he could not see the faces of the people there, let alone identify who was who. Kendo did not speak. He stared at the shipyard closely. Under Emperor Black Dragon's signal, a cadence of slogans rang out. Countless workers walked out of the shipyard. They opened the side of the factory facing the West Sea, and a corner of a 100-meter-long steel ship could be vaguely seen. Under the watchful eyes of the people, the side of the ship was pulled by Emperor Black Dragon. It slid down the slope into the sea and slowly sank into the surging sea. Pino's heart was in his mouth. He almost thought that this thing would fall directly into the bottom of the sea. He did not expect that when the rest of the ship sank into the water, it actually floated on the surface of the sea, stirring up huge waves on its side. Oh my God, is it really completely made of steel? It actually floated. Pino was stunned for a moment, then suddenly realized, but steel is heavy. Even if it doesn't sink, without the help of a magician, how can it sail on the sea with just the sails? That speed is simply unimaginable. No, you have to remember that it was made by Master Corvette. These shipwrights have to consider everything before they build it. If the ship has any fatal flaws, they will not act rashly, Kendo said. When Pino turned to look at the old man, he saw that his eyes were shining with excitement. What's the name of this ship? I have to find a way to become its captain. Chapter 365. Caesar watched with satisfaction as the first ironclad warship in the northern lands slipped into the sea amidst the cheers of the crowd. To be honest, it was not easy to get this ship. Caesar knew nothing about ships, and the barren northern lands lacked shipbuilding technology. There were only a few shipbuilders who knew the rope. Fortunately, the Empire had spread the news of Emperor Black Dragon's bounty to every corner of the continent through the Public Opinion Control Department, attracting many talents. Unlike the solid wooden ships that were wrapped in iron sheets, this ship used a steel frame for the first time. Whether it was the design or the quality of the materials, it was a grade ahead of the mainstream ships of today. Its overall strength was also several times higher than wooden warship. Coward Willen, a master from a faraway trading city-state, received the attention and respect of the officials the moment he arrived at the west coast. This shipbuilder was not inflexible. After spending a period of time to understand the driving mode and working principle of the steam furnace, he quickly modified the blueprints he had in mind long ago and designed a warship that met the requirements of the Northern Empire. After all the technical difficulties were overcome, Coward's shipyard immediately received the support of the Empire. This incomparably huge machine was given to him, and it only took a year for the armored warship requested by Emperor Caesar to be ready. But now, this thing is still a half-finished product. Caesar stared at the gigantic sea beast that was even larger than himself and exuded the beauty of steel. In order to speed up the construction, this armored warship was not equipped with a power module and weapon system. However, Coward had already taken this into consideration when he was designing the ship. He had reserved slots and interfaces for the steam furnace, transmission structure, and paddle wheels in the hull. The next step was to weld these metal parts together. It was not difficult to install them. This design idea was not bad, and Caesar decided to keep it for the sake of mass production in the assembly line factory. When the feasibility of building an armored warship was demonstrated, the Empire had already invested a large amount of manpower and resources in the controlled area of the West Coast to build a large-scale assembly line factory. That was the true official shipyard of the Northlands. With the advent of molds, machine tools, and so on, the shipyard was able to produce the exact same ship parts as long as they didn't change the requirement. This was to prevent any mishaps when installing the ship's power system and weapon modules. With technical support, reliable modules, and a large amount of manpower, the only factor that limited the production of armored ships was the production of steel. However, with the unbridled mining of mineral veins in the north and the import of steel, the steel provided was more than enough to support the Empire's needs. In other words, the Northlands could produce more than 3 armored ships within a year. If Emperor Black Dragon was willing to expand the scale of the shipyard, the number would increase even more. It should be known that this was not an ordinary merchant ship or sailboat, but a huge armored ship for the military. In naval battles, such an armored ship was usually used as a flagship, and it would be supplemented by a small fleet of warships of a certain scale. This meant that if the production speed of the steam furnace and the training of the Blackwing crew could keep up, the Empire would be able to possess a vast naval force within 5 years. The entire West Coast would be filled with their own warships, and even the legendary fleet that destroyed a nation would not be able to do so. This was the charm of the combination of industry and magic. Now that the armored ships had been successfully launched into the sea, the next step was to install the power components. The weapon assembly had to be delayed a little because the originally expected black cannons had been banned, and the weapons workshop was developing new cannons. This was also the reason why Caesar was willing to give up 125-pound black cannons and give them all to the Elven Forest. "Your Majesty, I don't understand." Hogg stood at the feet of the Black Dragon, raised his head and asked, "This will be our best weapon. Why did you leak it in advance?" The Gnoll scanned the crowd with his scarlet eyes. "There are humans from other places here who may become our enemies. To promote the strength of the country." "Huh! I want them to see the empire becoming stronger day by day. Caesar smiled. Before I ruled here, there shouldn't have been such a thing in the Northlands, right? With the gradual improvement of living standards and the appearance of things that didn't exist before, their recognition of the empire will become higher and higher. This increase in mentality is comprehensive, from resistance to skepticism, then to determination, piety, and worship. In the end, they will even think that the empire is omnipotent. I still don't understand. You are not a god and can't absorb faith. So what is the point of doing this? Hogg's voice was still doubtful. I can't absorb faith, but it doesn't mean that faith is useless to me. Black Dragon whispered, if everyone in the Empire is willing to die for it, then what is the difference between the Blackwing Empire and the Divine Kingdom? What do I have to do with the gods here? He stopped halfway and lowered his head to smile at the knoll. You just need to understand. Exposing the armored ships is a means of propaganda. After the new ship was launched, it underwent a 2-week-long inspection. After confirming that there were no problems, the officials immediately invited Corvet Vallon to the palace, where a grand award ceremony was held in front of everyone. It was officially announced that due to the outstanding contributions of the shipbuilder Corvet Vallon to the Empire, His Majesty had decided to award him the title of Count. Although the title of Blackwing Noble could not be hereditary since the establishment of the Empire had reserved the right for his descendants to inherit Count Corvet's fief. The impact of this matter was even greater than the impact of the armored ships. After all, only a small number of people paid attention to ships and warships, but being awarded the title of nobility was an honor that all of the Empire's citizens yearned for. Moreover, the title bestowed by His Majesty this time was not low. A count. Since the establishment of the Blackwing Empire, the palace had not awarded anyone the title of nobility. People had begun to wonder if the Empire was going to abolish the noble system. However, at this time, a new noble had stepped onto the stage of the Empire. What was even more dramatic was that the person who had been conferred the title was actually a shipbuilder. Although Corvet had a wide reputation in the industry and was respectfully called a master by the people in the industry, in reality, in Iradia's current view of values, he was still just a craftsman. His status was the same as that of a merchant, far less honorable than an unattainable mage. He could not even be compared to a slightly capable adventurer. However, the title of nobility that all the spellcasters who had defected to the Empire yearned for had been obtained by such a craftsman. Some of the sharper people had already smelled the Empire's attitude from this incident. They could clearly see what the palace truly valued and encouraged. At the same time, this conferment of nobility had also caused dissatisfaction among some of the spellcasters who served the Empire. However, that was all. The spellcasters soon fell silent, unable to continue. Chapter 366. Your Majesty, the Empire urgently needs a war. The one who suggested this was not the war maniac Hogg or Nero, but the demi-lich Ren. I think we need to invade a rich land as soon as possible. Conquer, kill, and plunder. Why? Caesar lowered his head to look at him suspiciously. Although this black dragon wasn't a good guy, he wasn't like the chromatic dragon who was controlled by the desire to conquer at any time. Caesar himself didn't desire war, especially a meaningless war without a purpose. He didn't want it. I'm sorry to remind you, but the Empire's treasury is already in deficit. Ren lowered his head and said, our export trade and taxes are not enough to support the Empire's expenses. Apart from the production line and munitions factories that can make a profit, your Blackwing Army, weapons research, material manufacturing, shipyard, and smelting factory all require a large amount of funding. Right now we are already stretched thin. Caesar looked surprised. You're saying the treasury is in deficit? We export more than 3,000 armors and weapons every month. Add to that the grain and wood trade, And the elegy brand, that makes a lot of money and taxes, and it's still not enough to cover the Empire's expenses? Yes, Your Majesty. Ren nodded and took out a large pile of books from his dimensional pocket. These are the detailed records of the Empire's income and expenditure for the year. My subordinates have already finished calculating them. You can check them out if you need. Forget it. Black Dragon waved his claws. Asking him to look up these things was practically a form of torture. No wonder Ryan said that the Empire needed an invasion. This was the fastest way these fellows could think of to make money. War was indeed easy to make money, especially for a mixed-up empire like Black Wing. However, Caesar was not interested in such a war. Moreover, it was not a long-term plan for a country to rely on plundering to maintain internal friction. Necessary institutions such as shipyards and weapons research facilities could not be stopped. He had to think of a way to make money. How long can my treasury last if I open it? Caesar asked in a muffled voice. His treasury was not the same as the Empire's. After conquering the entire northern lands, this fellow had finally become rich. The Black Dragon's treasury in the depths of the palace had mountains of gold and silver, enough for the Empire to squander for some time. Everyone knew what treasure meant to a dragon. It was already good enough that the Black Dragon Emperor did not take all the gold coins of the Empire for himself. His voice immediately lowered, and he said submissively, "Your Majesty, even if we don't pay the compensation, those people have to work for the royal court. And your Black Wing army is also very loyal to you. They will not cause a commotion because of a lack of food." Are you kidding? The Black Dragon glared at him and exhaled 2 puffs of white smoke from his nose. His thunderous voice echoed in the royal court. I asked you, how long can you last? This is impossible to estimate accurately, but even so, it can only last for about half a year to a year. That's enough. Caesar huffed angrily. All right, that's all for now. Now listen carefully. I want to discuss something else with you. It's my pleasure. Renee bowed. Go and inform the people in charge of the various regions and clan leaders. The royal court wants to open banks in the entire northern lands. Banks? Renee repeated subconsciously. He then searched his long memories and found that there was no such term. Only then did he raise his head and look at the Black Dragon Emperor with a doubtful gaze. Put the spellcaster team aside for now. I'll briefly explain it to you. Listen carefully because you'll be in charge of the following matters. Caesar said, the Empire has indeed spent a lot of money. However, the money did not disappear. Instead, it went from the treasury to the people and merchants in the form of payment and purchase of resources. I've said before, only the gold coins that have been spent have meaning. However, their meaning ends here because most of the gold coins have been hidden away after reaching the hands of the humans. They have been turned into stones and buried in wine cellars or underground caves. The low taxes cannot allow them to return to the Empire. This is also the reason why you told me that the treasury is in deficit. Your Majesty, what do you mean? What I mean is that we have to find a way to take them back, Caesar said. He then glanced at the soul fire surging in Renee's eye sockets and added, of course, not by plundering. Then what should we do? Humans are all misers. If we don't use force, these damned bastards will never willingly return the gold coins that originally belonged to the Empire. The half-lich said. It is precisely because the people know that the gold coins are valuable that they are not willing to return them to the Empire. Caesar said. But what if the Empire tells them that as long as they lend the gold coins to the Empire, as time passes, the gold coins that belong to them will become more and more? I don't understand, Your Majesty. Renee doubtfully said, You mean that the Empire will borrow money from the people and return them more money after a period of time? But this way, it will be even harder for us to have any gold coins left. No, once the Empire returns more money to the first person, more and more people will be willing to lend money to the Empire. The empire will only have more money in their hands. Caesar denied. I understand. Renee nodded. As far as I can remember, it's not like no one has ever done such a thing. There was once a merchant in a trading city-state in the central region who did the same thing. When the news spread, a few big creditors suddenly joined forces to demand that the merchant pay his debt. But he couldn't pay that much money, so he was dismembered. His words made Caesar slightly surprised. He didn't think that Iradia would have so many smart people. The Black Dragon paused for a moment before nodding. That's right, but the empire is different from merchants. The empire is the guarantee that the people rely on to survive. The empire is the ruler of the lives of the people. The empire is the authority and guarantee that the people can rely on. As long as the empire is prosperous, even if it is only on the surface, this kind of situation will be very difficult to appear. But in order to prevent this kind of situation from happening, some rules can be added. For example, there will be no profit after a month of borrowing money, the profit will increase every year, the profit will be recalculated after borrowing money again, and so on. Renee hesitated. But no matter what, if the amount of gold coins doesn't increase in the end, then this illusion will be broken sooner or later. I'm afraid that this will cause even more turmoil. Then what if it really does increase? Caesar tilted his head. We are not the only country in this world. The empire can use the surplus money to do so many things. How can it not increase? You've thought it through. Ryan bowed wholeheartedly. He then asked one last question. It's just that the empire is borrowing money from the people. This has never happened in Eladia since ancient times. Wouldn't it be a little bad if word got out? Then give it a different name. Chapter 367. Emperor Black Dragon's thought process was not difficult to understand. The people of Iradia were not stupid. It was not that there were no similar scams and schemes in history, but if ordinary people were to use this method, they would be exposed and bankrupt in the end. However, for the Blackwing Empire, as long as it was done properly, such a possibility would not exist in a short period of time. Profit and trust were the key. Profit made the borrower willing to hand over the gold coins to the court, and with the trust of the empire, the borrower would never have to worry about not being able to withdraw the money when they wanted to. After the Northlanders became accustomed to the court's bank, unless they really needed money, no one would withdraw money just out of worry. In fact, Caesar had thought of this plan a long time ago, but due to the timing, he had not used it. However, as the Blackwing Empire's rule became more stable, the Northlanders' sense of belonging to the empire increased day by day, and it was time for a similar financial model to appear on the stage. Caesar did not study economics in his previous life. To be more precise, he should have known nothing about it. However, due to the information collected from the information explosion world, the Black Dragon did know some things that the people of Iradia could not see and did not understand, and these things were often of great use. The bank must be built because it was only the first step. When this model was gradually accepted by the people and the strength of the empire increased again, the court would definitely issue currency to replace the flow of precious metals for transactions. I'm thinking a little too far. Borrowing from the people did not sound good, so Caesar came up with a new name for this model: Blackwing bonds. The new name is just the beginning. If you want it to take effect, then you have to at least establish a formal and complete system, so that it not only looks like it, but also can actually operate. Ryan didn't leave. Instead, he summoned more assistants to listen to the Black Dragon Emperor's teachings. There are many rules and regulations that need to bind everyone, including us. Caesar sat cross-legged on the throne. Beside him, Black Shirt lowered his head and focused on writing notes, ensuring that he did not miss any of Emperor Black Dragon's words for later reading and thinking. Now I'll tell you some of the necessary details. Take note, this is not all. After you leave, you have to think and supplement on your own. After a week, report back to the palace and finalize the final detailed regulations. Caesar said, a mature economic system must consider many things: stability, order, development. But right now, the empire's matters have only just begun, so you only need to consider stability and order for the time being. The so-called stability refers to the stability of the capital, and right now, the empire's only source of income is the Blackwing bonds, so we must ensure that the people do not casually ask for repayment. You mentioned it before. Profit, Ryan replied. If we want to ensure financial stability, we can't just rely on profit. Caesar said, it's true that the people can make a profit by buying bonds, but they're skeptical of something that's too easy to obtain. Just now, we changed the name of this loan. Now, you have to tell the people that the Blackwing bonds are recognized and protected by the court's laws. The Imperial Bank refuses to redeem the gold coins before the agreed time. But if that's the case, I'm afraid the people won't be willing to lend by Blackwing bonds, Ryan reminded. There's no need to be so strict, Ryan. Black Dragon shook his head. If the people who have already bought the bonds repeatedly ask to exchange the gold coins, the bank can let them redeem the bonds ahead of time, but the punishment is inevitable. The bank can deduct the money through various excuses such as handling fees, liquidated damages, and so on. But remember, these deductions can't involve the principal. For example, the Imperial Bank refuses to sell the bonds to this person? One of Ryan's young assistants interjected. Not bad. Black Dragon nodded approvingly at the young man in black. In more formal terms, this is called disqualifying the person from buying Blackwing bonds again. After the restrictions are laid out, the next step is to increase the stickiness of the Blackwing bond. When the time comes, the Imperial Bank must tell the people that the profit from buying bonds will increase year by year. For example, the first year after the purchase, the profit will be 1%, the second year's profit will rise to 2%, the third year's profit will rise to 3%, and so on until the profit rises to 5%. The reason for doing this is to let the bond buyers have the impression that the longer they buy the bonds, the higher the return. For example, if you have 100 gold coins and bury it at home for a year, it will still be 100 gold coins, but after a year of buying Blackwing bonds, it will become 101 gold coins. What do you think the people will choose? There's no need to choose. His Majesty's praise gave the young man in black confidence. His voice grew a little louder. Not only that, as long as the Empire's authority is guaranteed, the people will gradually develop the habit of using their money to buy Blackwing bonds instead of burying them. And unless they urgently need money, they will do their best not to redeem the bonds. That's right. Caesar let out a low laugh. Now, I'll give you a question to think about. Suppose you are a merchant who has bought 10,000 gold coins worth of imperial bonds for 11 months. The agreed time limit for redemption hasn't arrived yet, but because of the lack of funds, you are in urgent need of gold coins. If you redeem the bonds immediately, you can only get 10,000 gold coins. But if you wait for another month, you can get an extra 100 gold coins. What would you do? Of course I would continue to wait. 100 gold coins is the reward I earn for serving the Empire for a year. How could I not wait? Idiot. Didn't you hear what His Majesty said? There is no time to wait. The merchant is in urgent need of gold coins. Then there is no choice. We can only redeem the bond. The black-robed men discussed animatedly. Your Majesty. After waiting for a while, the youngest black-robed man suddenly stood up and said, in a situation where I can't disobey the Imperial Bank, the best way I can think of is to sell the bonds to another merchant at the price of 10,090 gold coins. This way, not only will I get my gold coins and profits, but the merchant will also earn 10 gold coins after a month. What is your name? The black dragon lowered his head slightly and looked at the tiny human with his vertical eye. The young black-robed man hurriedly knelt down and said in a trembling voice, Danby. My name is Danby Sherlock, the great emperor. You are not bad. I will remember your name. Caesar nodded his head in satisfaction. Meanwhile, the other black-robed men all said, "Damn it, why didn't I think of that?" Indeed, Dampier's choice was the best, but perhaps he himself did not understand that in this process, the Blackwing bond itself had replaced the value of 10,000 gold coins. In other words, it had the function of a currency in a certain sense. Once people became accustomed to this, the Imperial Bank would begin to issue paper money. The Blackwing Court would also become the first country in Iradia to use paper money. Chapter 368. Iradia's Third Era, Summer 1656. On this day, the same scene appeared in various regions of the Northern Empire. In the center of various towns and settlements, more than 100 carpenters and workers were working in full swing in a semi-open field. This was nothing new. After all, the Blackwing Empire was in an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity. Industry and commerce were developing at an unimaginable speed, and new shops were opening in various towns and cities every few days. However, what was new was that these carpenters had the help of spellcasters. The speed at which they built the buildings was 10 times faster than normal, or even more. People quickly realized that this was not normal. The will of the empire was pushing for the construction of new buildings, and it seemed to be rather urgent. Just at the beginning of the construction, the Imperial Bank had attracted enough attention. In just half a month, the first stage of the urgent construction was completed. The walls of the Imperial Bank, which occupied a large area of the ground, were paved with polished marble. The whole thing was a clear grayish-white color, magnificent and seamless. The eye-catching mark of the Black Wing was shining at the top of the wall. Looking inside through the glass door, the interior of the bank was also exquisitely decorated. The floor was made of thick oak, and the walls were covered with clean white porcelain. The central counter had various tables and chairs arranged neatly. All the banks in the empire were built from the same blueprint. In other words, the banks in the various towns and cities looked exactly the same, except for the different staff. After having lunch as usual, Dampier tidied up the documents in his hands. He then stretched and prepared to go out for a walk. Opportunities would come quietly in unexpected places. A series of questions and answers in the court had given Dampier a sudden opportunity. He was recognized by His Majesty the Emperor and was sent to Kassan City. He was appointed as an inspector of the Imperial Bank in the region. The Empire did not prohibit officials from buying Blackwing bonds, so Dampier had taken note of this. 2 days ago, the Imperial Bank had just opened, and he was so busy that he did not have time to spare. Now that he finally had some time, he decided to buy himself a Blackwing bond. As he was an insider, Dampier knew that the Emperor's instructions had allowed the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Publicity to fully cooperate with the Blackwing bonds. After half a month of preliminary work, he believed that all the Northlanders were aware of its existence. As for the possibility of a queue at the bank's office window, Dampier was already mentally prepared. But when he stepped into the Imperial Bank, what he saw was beyond his expectation. The lobby of the bank was as empty as when it had just been completed. Except for the staff yawning in their seats, there was not a single person in sight. "Good afternoon, Danby. Aren't you resting today?" As a colleague, the man in the black shirt at the door was already familiar with him. When he saw him come in, he immediately greeted him. "Good afternoon, I'm here to buy myself a Blackwing bond," he answered briefly. "My pleasure. Let Roseanne register you as our 21st customer." 21st? Dampier asked in return. Up until now, there have only been 21 buyers of the Imperial Bank of Kassan City's Blackwing bonds. That's right, and we bought half of them ourselves. All right. Dampier took a deep breath and took his cane and money pouch to the counter to register. Other than having an anti-counterfeiting mark like the elegy, The Blackwing bonds also had a unique authentication code. One had to register before they could be purchased. He bought a 20 gold Blackwing bond. After registering, there was plenty of time, so Dampier did not leave immediately. He chose to sit in a corner of the lobby and observe for a while. After nearly an hour, there was only one other person who came to buy a Blackwing bond other than him. He looked like a local citizen of Cassan and only bought 50 silver coins. These signs seemed to indicate that the Blackwing bonds were not selling well. Why? Dampier did not understand. To be honest, he admired their emperor. As a true dragon, His Majesty Caesar had an accurate grasp of human nature. He had thought of everything that should be thought of. The attraction of the Blackwing bonds was magnified several times in His Majesty's hands. Under these circumstances, this situation should not have happened. Why did the people not flock to buy the bonds? Did they not know about this? Impossible. The construction of the Imperial Bank had already attracted enough attention. There was definitely no problem with the official publicity. Unless it was a resident who stayed at home all the time, everyone should have known about this. Dampier could not figure it out. However, he soon became excited because he suddenly realized that the situation in Cassan City was probably not an isolated case. If there were no accidents, the sales of the Blackwing bonds in all parts of the Empire should not be ideal. If he could be the first to find out the reason and a solution, he would be able to help Emperor Black Dragon solve a huge problem. He would also be able to climb up more than one level. After thinking about this, Dampier immediately left the Imperial Bank. He did not have to work today, so he did not wear a black shirt. He could pretend to be an ordinary citizen and ask around as he walked. The situation was not much different from what he had guessed. Most people had heard of the Blackwing bonds and had a certain understanding of it from various sources. However, most people would kindly remind him, "Young man, let me tell you secretly while there are no black shirts around. You are young and inexperienced, so you don't understand. Don't touch that thing. It's a lie, you know." "Why?" "Why? It's all Iradia. Have you ever seen such a thing? Giving gold coins to the feudal lord for safekeeping. Isn't that just giving money to the feudal lord?" I understand now. Dampier really understood why no one was interested in the Blackwing bonds even though they had clearly advertised it well. The reason was in these people's words. Firstly, Iradia had never had such a precedent. People would naturally feel fear and resistance towards something they had never come into contact with. Secondly, the people did not trust their lords at all. Before the Black Dragon Emperor ruled over the northern lands, the rulers of the northern kingdoms were too unsightly, causing them to have no credibility among the people. This distrust also indirectly extended to the new rulers. The empire would need at least a generation of new and old people to replace each other in order to rebuild the trust system. Dampier came to this conclusion. He thought about it. If he had not become a black shirt and was tied to the empire, he would have resisted the Blackwing bonds and would not have dared to act rashly. That's normal. Caesar casually tossed the report of his black shirt subordinate to the side and said to the worried Luna, "I didn't want everyone to flock over to buy the bonds. If that happens, it won't be good. This is a long-term plan. As time passes and word of mouth spreads, the people buying the Blackwing bonds will slowly increase. Fortunately, we are long-lived species." Luna thought about it and patted her chest as if to comfort herself. Chapter 369. Invisible, wandering magic power extended from the wizard tower, monitoring and confining the space within a few miles. Region Chain was a permanent legendary spell that was fixed in a certain area. It was somewhat like a simplified version of the God's Kingdom's law, but its effect was more specific and narrow. The effect of this spell had appeared when Alex sealed the Black Dragon Tangerine. Now, it was used by Caesar and cast by the ancient Red Dragon Kados. The rune mark at the top of the wizard tower was the hub that controlled the entire area. A dozen spellcasters were carefully observing the surroundings, maintaining vigilance. This was the Dragon's Nest, the secret experimental base of the Blackwing Empire. A colorful light screen flickered a few times. This was the region chain's self-inspection. The black dragon's huge body passed through the light screen from the other side. After a series of ripples, the light screen stabilized and became colorless. Within the range of the region chain's control, no investigation or disguise could be hidden. Seeing the black dragon step into the field, the black-clothed spellcasters whose faces were covered by hoods bowed their heads and saluted, "Your Majesty." In the field, a giant mithril cultivation pool with a diameter of nearly 30 meters was shining brightly. Just to build this cultivation pool alone, the Empire had spent a lot of money. The mithril materials with excellent conductivity could simulate all kinds of complicated environments in the cultivation pool. Several sources of magic power were bought from the trading city-states at a huge cost, and endless magic power was injected into the pool. In the cultivation pool, a dozen dragon eggs were slowly floating in the liquefied magic power. Their surfaces were covered with tiny scales, and the colorful patterns on them made them look as if they were inlaid with jewels. The deep magic power was like the midnight ocean, exuding waves and whirlpools of vitality. The dragon eggs were of different species, but most of them were the eggs of the red dragon and the golden dragon. The black-clothed spellcasters surrounded the dragon eggs and busied around the cultivation pool, carefully adjusting the growth environment of the eggs to ensure that every step was foolproof. "How is it?" Caesar asked. "It's going well, Your Majesty." The spellcaster nodded slightly. "The ecology of the 12 true dragon eggs is normal. The preliminary adjustment has been completed, and the incubation process can be done at any time. If you need them, they will break out of their shells soon." The research of dragon scholars had shown that whether a dragon could break out of its shell healthily and smoothly was actually traceable when it was in the egg. Dead eggs could not condense a body, but living eggs had already gradually condensed souls in the egg. What was really difficult to distinguish was the difference between a dragon beast and a true dragon. Theoretically, a fully developed baby dragon could withstand the pressure of the dragon race's heritage, but in reality, a large number of them would still be reduced to low-intelligence dragons. But Caesar didn't care. He didn't care if they were real dragons or dragon beasts. He just wanted the dragon eggs to be alive. Under the circumstances that most people did not know, the Dragonmaw project continued to be carried out in secrecy. In addition to Kadosi's plan to capture the Pentashade dragons to serve the Empire, Caesar also had his eyes on the dragon eggs. The Blackwing Empire had sent a secret team to various regions to provide the Empire with normal dragon eggs by purchasing, stealing, plundering, and so on. The Pentashade dragons were generally incompetent parents. The young Pentashade dragons would casually lay their eggs in the countryside, so it was not difficult to obtain the eggs of the Pentashade dragons. However, it was not easy to obtain the eggs of the metal dragons. Most of the eggs in the incubation pool were bought from the black market of the trading cities, and the price was extremely high. The method of cultivating dragon eggs was not complicated, and Iradia had similar technique. However, true dragons were born with memories and inheritance, and had a deep understanding of their own existence. It was impossible to expect them to recognize humans as their family and master. Even in the eyes of a newborn dragon, humans were probably no different from monkeys, and dragon beasts were low intelligence and violent beasts. There was no need to cultivate them, so cultivating dragon eggs was a strenuous and unrewarding task. Now, only a few ambitious people would still do it. For example, Caesar. "You've worked hard. Well done." The black dragon was not stingy with his praise. He nodded and said, "Prepare to start the incubation process." The spellcasters all retreated to the back and waited in silence. The black dragon narrowed his eyes and slowly stretched out his claws, casting his radiation. The reward in the Black Dream was not as simple as nuclear radiation. This ability had a comprehensive effect on living beings. In addition to the distortion of the body and the increase of strength, it could also distort the will and cognition of living beings. Caesar had tried this distortion before, and it was especially strong on newborn living beings. An invisible storm rose with the black dragon as the center, spreading rapidly in all directions. As if they had their own consciousness, they instantly discovered the dragon eggs floating in the breeding pool. Then, they howled and rushed into the pool, fighting to be the first to enter. At the same time, the spellcasters in black controlled the incubation pool to replenish the dragon eggs with nutrients. Soon, in the incubation pool filled with magic power, the surface of the eggs began to crack. The delicate dragon claws of the hatchlings pried open the cracks of life. They crawled out, their bodies covered in tender red mucus. Then, they let out the first roar of their lives. Rand Crowdawak. Tangerine, my true name. The first to speak was a male golden dragon cub. Its voice was particularly loud and sharp. I am Tia Balshk Tangerine, the female red dragon following behind said in a low voice. She also used Tangerine as her surname. It was worth mentioning that this red dragon cub was particularly strong. It was more than twice the size of the golden dragon that hatched before it. Also, this guy had 2 pairs of wings. It was obviously a monster with a deformed growth. However, from its pure dragon language, it seemed to have also received the dragon's inheritance and was not affected by it. My name is Tulu Zweigler Tangerine. Grote Udur Tangerine. Looking at the hatchlings that broke out of their shells one after another, the spellcasters whispered to each other. Sometimes they would look at the Black Dragon Emperor. Humans who had the potential to become magicians were not fools. Through the names of the hatchlings, they could vaguely guess something unusual. Just as the spellcasters were in a daze, Caesar suddenly turned his head and ordered, "Check their life level and growth curve." Yes. The spellcasters recovered from their reverie and hurriedly nodded. However, soon their eyes widened. This is impossible, Your Majesty. The spellcaster supervisor in charge of this matter looked at the data obtained through the spell examination and said in disbelief, "The spell examination shows that their growth curve is unimaginably fast. It is far beyond the normal level of the hatchlings that we have collected. This means that they will approach adulthood in a very short period of time. However, their lifespans will not be as long as those of true dragons. I'm afraid that they can only live for about 100 to 200 years. Also, Your Majesty, please forgive me for saying too much." The spellcaster supervisor smacked his lips and added, "My spell shows that these hatchlings do not seem to have the ability to reproduce." Chapter 370. Yahoo! Luna sat on a small dragon and flew past Caesar. Behind her was a large group of chirping dragon whelps. The black dragon, who was bored to death, swayed his tail as he observed this scene. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he gradually frowned. According to the basic laws of the biosphere, the top predators had a huge demand for food and resources. When these little guys grew up, providing for their daily needs would become a big problem. Although this problem did not seem to be a big problem for a prosperous empire, it should be known that the royal court was already struggling to make ends meet. Their daily expenses were supported by Caesar's treasure trove. This was only the first batch of experimental dragon eggs. If there were no accidents, there would be at least 60 of these dragons in his empire. When all 50 dragons grew up, the daily expenses would be an astronomical figure. These descendants of the Black King, who were born through radiation distortion, had an unimaginably short growth cycle, but their appetite was also several times that of dragon whelps of the same age. To solve this series of problems, according to the Demolic Ryan, conquering and plundering was the most direct and effective way. However, Caesar did not have the intention to expand at the moment. Unlike the ordinary ferocious pentashade dragons, Caesar did not have the so-called desire to slaughter and war. At the same time, Iradia did not have any countries that had a grudge with the Black Wing Empire. His enemies were in the astral plane. Caesar. Just as Caesar was thinking, Cados, who had transformed into a human, walked into the royal court. Although he had already pledged his loyalty to the Black Dragon, it was a little difficult for the prideful ancient Red Dragon to address a Black Dragon as His Majesty. Therefore, he kept the title of Emperor to the Black Dragon. Of course, Caesar did not need to show his pride and dignity through these details, so he acquiesced to Cados' actions. These children. Cados looked at the dragon whelps who were carried out of the royal court by Luna and said hesitantly, "They call you, father?" "Okay." Caesar nodded. "Although I don't know what method you used to turn these newborns into weapons of war that are loyal to you, please allow me to remind you that because of what you have done in the past, your existence will inevitably be exposed to the entire world. Those powerful creatures and gods will be watching your every move." "I know. But perhaps you don't know, Iradia was not ruled by dragons in prehistoric times. In the most ancient times, the natives of this world, a group of elves called Quell Dorii, ruled everything on the continent. When the dragons entered this world, they had already developed a brilliant wizard and shaman civilization. A war broke out between the native species and the foreign species, but unexpectedly, the true dragons from the foreign domain were no match for these native creatures. The Quell Dorii killed the dragon forerunner, Kalsardov, and captured and imprisoned the remaining dragons. The collision of civilizations allowed the development of Quell Dorii to reach its peak. At this time, Quell Dorii began to study the powerful creatures from the outside world and tried to enslave the true dragons. They did it, but they also touched the taboo. Quell Dorii was indeed a terrifying race. Not only did they create witchcraft to enslave adult dragons, but they also had the ability to modify the inheritance of the dragons written by the dragon god, allowing the newborn dragon whelps to be used by them from the beginning until they died. But their arrogance and ignorance attracted the wrath of the dragon god. Like all the races that played with fire, the evil dragon mother and the good dragon king rarely killed the same race at the same time. In the end, the furious five-headed dragon queen and the roaring platinum dragon god worked together to destroy this world. After that, the first era of Iradia began, and more dragons entered this dimension. The five-colored dragons and the metal dragons rebuilt their civilization on the wasteland after the destruction of the world and started a long dispute. Cados told him a part of history. Because it was a long time ago, Eladia no longer had any information that could be verified. This part of the memory was also not part of the inheritance of the dragons. However, Caesar believed that it had indeed existed and happened. There was no need for the red dragon to lie to him about this matter. "Okay." Caesar nodded indifferently. "I understand what you mean." Cados stared at the expression on the black dragon's face for a while, and then said, "It seems that you don't intend to stop. I guess, what you are thinking is that since you and the five-headed dragon queen are already enemies, it doesn't matter if you offend her more. Next, you just need to avoid the metal dragons and target the eggs of the five-colored evil dragons, and this plan can continue. It won't work. Although the platinum dragon god and the five-headed dragon queen are like fire and water, the two dragon gods are after all the children of His Majesty Io. Although the five-colored dragons and the metal dragons are mortal enemies, they have a very tacit agreement with each other. You used an unknown method to enslave the five-colored dragons, and the platinum dragon god will not ignore it. Caesar, stop. You are already powerful enough. You don't need to rely on this method to gain favor. You are making enemies out of nothing and digging your own grave. After Cados finished speaking, Caesar thought for a while and asked someone to call Hogg, René, and Angramo. After these core leaders arrived, Caesar told them about the Dragonmaw clan's plan and the hidden danger that Cadeaux mentioned. Making enemies out of nothing? Caesar did not agree with Cadeaux's statement. In fact, before the Dragonmaw clan's plan began, it was not that he did not consider this layer, but he still did it. Putting aside the threat of Tiamat, what was certain was that he, as a mutated black dragon, was an obvious unstable factor in the eyes of the Platinum Dragon God. This would not change just because he had cooperated with the Metal Dragons. Putting aside the fact that he basically walked on the edge of killing and bloodshed during the process of his rise to power, just the sudden emergence of a powerful country ruled by mutated dragons on the continent of Iradia, if Caesar had the divine title of the Platinum Dragon God, he would also be full of vigilance against this black dragon. Your Majesty, do you mean that even if we don't carry out the Dragonmaw clan's plan, the Platinum Dragon God and the Metal Dragons will be our enemies sooner or later? René analyzed. It was true that the Platinum Dragon God had the divine concept of pure kindness, but that didn't mean that this Dragon God, who had lived for countless years, had always been a smiling, nice guy. It wasn't without reason that the legend of Eladia's Bahamut's breath had been passed down to this day. Caesar firmly believed that unless he provided faith to Bahamut or gave up on building his own forces, the Metal Dragons and the Blackwing Empire would face a break sooner or later as his forces grew day by day. After a period of honeymoon between the Metal Dragons and the Blackwing Empire, the two sides would face a break sooner or later. Angrimo growled, "Father, even Tiamat was defeated by you. It is impossible that the Metal Dragons do not fear you. If they want to be enemies with the Empire, they must consider your strength." It's not the same. Cadeaux shook his head. The wisdom and experience he had gained over the years allowed him to provide a lot of help to Kaiser. Therefore, after joining the Black Wing Empire, Gulong had quickly entered the decision-making level. Tiamat, since you guys have no qualms, I'll just call you by your god's name. Tiamat is an evil god, and the forces she can command are only the Pentashade dragons and some evil people. Not only is she weak, but she also has to scheme against each other. In the situation where she and her direct descendants can't do anything, Tiamat's threat to this place has decreased by more than one level. Cadeaux said that he was going to call the god by her name, but he still silently cast an isolation spell. After glancing at the Black Dragon Emperor, he continued, "But the King of Good Dragons is different. His supporters, friends, and partners are everywhere in the endless world. For creatures like us who have not come into contact with that level, Bahamut's influence is much greater." Under normal circumstances, this is indeed suicidal. Hogg calmly analyzed, but this is the prime material plane. In the situation where the gods are unable to descend personally, even the Platinum Dragon God will not be able to cause any impact on the Empire. In the end, it will just be a war. The Dragonmaw clan's plan to supplement the Empire's high-end forces allows us to be fearless of any war. Okay, Caesar said, "After all, I have cooperated with the Metal Dragons, and the Platinum Dragon God is also a good god. The Empire should not take the initiative to break off with them. The Dragonmaw clan's plan is to make some changes. For the time being, do not touch the eggs of the true dragons. Let the allied forces choose the dragons back." Chapter 371. Caesar remained in the Blackwing court after preparing his future strategy for the Metal Dragons. While he was finally in the mood to deal with serious matters, he summoned the leader of the Red Lotus Goblins. Caesar was his name. Originally, goblins did not have the concept of names. This name was bestowed by Emperor Black Dragon. When this goblin leader, whose head was twice the size of an ordinary goblin's, arrived at the court, Caesar had been waiting for a long time. After the breakthrough in the development of mercury fulminate, Caesar immediately asked the goblins to put the development of a new generation of weapons on the agenda. After entering the era of firearms, the greater the power, the more glorious it was. The more turrets, the more righteous it was. Within the range of cannons, there was truth everywhere. However, the Blackwing Empire's current predicament was that, under the current circumstances, the nitric acid and sulfuric acid produced by the weapons research facility could not satisfy the research need. When Hageldin walked into the court and bowed, Caesar asked, "How's the mission I gave you?" "All the goblins in the tribe are working day and night to produce fulminate. Your Majesty, please believe us. We can definitely keep up with the Empire's footstep. Too slow." The goblin leader's words of loyalty did not move Caesar. Caesar shook his head and said, "You have disappointed me. The Empire's fleet is barren. They are idling on the west coast, corroded by the storm and wave. I need more fulminate, more." The black dragon raised his head, revealing his chilling fangs. "You can't satisfy the Empire's demand for gunpowder with the little that you have painstakingly produced. I asked you to ask the spellcasters for help to design a magic conduction system that can mass-produce fulminate. Did you listen carefully? I have already done it, Your Majesty." The unintentional dimensional pressure caused the goblins to panic. Hageldin trembled and hurriedly said, "It's the spellcasters, it's the spellcasters. Your Majesty, their actions are too slow. They can't provide us with any help at all." "Which spellcasters?" Caesar asked. As the Empire expanded, the number of spare parts increased. When one of the spare parts was disobedient, it would annoy him. "Let me take a look." Hageldin did as he was told and led Caesar to the place where the spellcasters of the court live. However, the news he received was that the system had already been completed and sent to the weapons research facility. However, the goblins' lives were too lazy, so the news did not reach Hageldin's ears. That was just a small interlude. The subsequent punishment and personnel adjustments were Hog's responsibility, and Caesar did not need to pay attention to such trivial matters. After learning that the spellcasters had already designed a magical system to produce the two acids, his next step was to design a set of powerful shipborne cannons to cover the 3 armored fleets that had already been delivered. Caesar thought for a moment and memorized the requirements of a qualified shipborne cannon. Firstly, as it was a naval battle, it had to have a sufficient range, power, and accuracy. It had to be able to penetrate the armor of the enemy ships from a distance of at least 1,000 meters. Secondly, it had to be loaded with ammunition. That way, the angle of elevation could be adjusted freely, allowing the armored ships to have the ability to retaliate even when facing enemies from a high altitude. Lastly, considering the requirements of design and development, mold manufacturing, and ease of operation, such a cannon should be able to be used for multiple purposes. It could be used as the main heavy cannon of the armored ships, or it could be pulled onto land and used as a fixed battery for fixed-point attack. Caesar tried hard to recall the memories of his previous life. He quickly remembered the 16 to 17-inch long behemoths on the battleship. Those things had a range of tens of kilometers, and a single shot could create a crater several meters deep in the ground. Its power was comparable to meteor magic. Could it be done? Caesar thought for a moment. If he had to do it by force, it was not impossible. With the support of magic engineering technology, the Blackwing Empire could forcefully avoid the problems of materials and processing. They could forcefully produce such a huge caliber, long-barreled super-heavy cannon. However, it was not worth it to forcefully produce it like this. The magic that the spellcasters expended here would be replenished in another way. The cost would be very high. Most importantly, it could not be mass-produced. It could only be used as a special weapon. If they relied on conventional factory production, the Blackwing Empire could only provide relatively high-purity wrought iron and steel with relatively ordinary performance. Therefore, it was better to be conservative. The gunpowder at the current stage could not allow such a super-heavy cannon to display its full power. However, it looked very powerful. Black Dragon muttered to himself. Then, he puffed up his cheeks and nodded repeatedly. Impracticality and high cost were all bullshit. As long as it looked mighty and majestic, it would be over. He thought for a moment and finally asked little Luna to help him draw a blueprint and hand it over to the spellcaster department. He wanted the spellcasters to work together to first create 3 super-heavy cannons with a caliber as high as 406 mm and install them on the 3 armored ships as the main turret. As for the new cannon that could be used as a conventional weapon, Caesar chose 88 mm, which was a classic number in the era of thermal weapons in his previous life. This would also lay the foundation for the land weapons that the new department was researching. Different from the design of the magic cannons, the Northern Empire's cannon had something completely different. The new cannon used the vertical wedge breech. Compared to the screw breech and horizontal wedge breech, its firing speed was the fastest. Moreover, the principle behind it was also very simple. It was similar to a door that could slide up and down. When it was lowered, the barrel would be exposed and the cannonball would be loaded. Of course, in reality, the internal structure of the cannon was far more complicated than the verbal description. However, Caesar was not an all-rounder. He did not understand those things and could not do them. As the ruler, he only needed to provide the design ideas and decisions. The rest would be left to his subordinates to take care of. Wait a minute. After passing on the design ideas, Caesar suddenly remembered that as the range of the cannon increased day by day, even with the assistance of the aiming equipment, it would not be easy to hit the target within the range of the cannon. It was even more so for the shipborne cannon. One would still have to calculate the projectile arc angle. This was not something that could be familiarized with in 2 or 3 days. The operator would have to understand the theoretical knowledge of the shooting trajectory. Caesar suddenly realized that as the standards of the Blackwing Empire increased in all aspects, there were many things that could no longer be mastered by just 2 random people. Those who wielded swords were no longer popular in the north. He needed various kinds of specialized talents. Not only did he need them now, but he would also need more and more in the future. Should we set up something like an academy? This idea suddenly popped up in Caesar's mind. Although it sounded ridiculous for an evil dragon to establish an academy in his territory, he did have an urgent need for such an academy. Currently, there was no such thing as an academy in Eladia. Skills and job classes were usually taught by teachers and apprentices. People didn't value knowledge, and it was difficult for them to come into contact with it. Most of the knowledge was in the hands of the schools and churches. Chapter 372. In the afternoon, André was standing in his room with a cigar in his mouth. He was looking at the slaves who were working hard outside through the window. His attire was completely different from the traditional attire of the trading city-states in the central region. He was dressed in a plain black robe with a black wing symbol on his shoulder. As the leader of the merchant group sent by the Northern Empire to the trading city-states in the central region, he immediately carried out the new orders from the upper echelons of the empire. Although the trading city-states had abandoned the slavery system in name, the root of the evil still existed in name. Under the drive of the system, the great slave owners of the city-states changed their appearances and names, but they were still active in the trading market. André put down his cigar. They called the humans outside as workers, but in reality, they were still slaves who could be bought and sold freely. And that was why he came here. Mr. André, you said that your country wants to mine the veins, and you need a large number of people and laborers. The great slave owner in front of him looked at André's request and asked doubtfully, "This is a hard job, but why do you choose these children who are not of age yet? The journey to the north is too long. I don't want them to rebel on the way. Only children are easier to manage." André took a sip of tea and said calmly, "And you're not happy to get rid of these annoying little things?" "A little. The other party smiled. As a slave owner who had the biggest business in the trading city-states and had not fallen for so many years, of course, he was not a mediocre fool. He knew that the other party was just making up an excuse. These children are precious wealth. I can wait for them to come of age and sell them at a high price. If some of these children have the talent to become professionals, then I'll make a lot of money. You know, with such a large number, some of them might have the potential to become spellcasters. These children are still growing. They eat a lot and don't listen to me. I don't believe that you have that kind of patience. André shook his head noncommittally. They are the things that you don't lack the most in the trade. You can use these slaves to exchange for the most precious gold here. Are you not willing? Even so. The slave owner glanced at the workers outside the window. But I'm losing out on this deal, so I have to pay more. Both sides echoed each other, just like when they were discussing goods. After some bargaining, they finally reached an agreement. Since it was their first time working together, both sides more or less had their concerns. Therefore, the transaction amount this time was not high. André bought 1,000 children at a price of 30 gold per person. They were all children below the age of 15, and the youngest was only 9 years old. André watched as the slave master's servants helped him count the number of children. Although he did not know the purpose of the empire's purchase of foreign slaves, there was no doubt that the order to only purchase children in the trade was correct. These children had been reduced to slaves and had no one to rely on. If Black Wing could save them from their misery, it would be no different from a second parent to them. Moreover, once they reached the north, they would have a long life ahead of them. After being in this business for a long time, the efficiency was naturally high. Very soon, the 1,000 children that André needed were counted. The slave owner's private army was responsible for escorting them to the port of the trading city-state. The sea route from the western sea of the north to the central inland sea had been opened, and trade between the two sides was much more convenient. The muddle-headed children lined up and arrived at the port. They were terrified of the army and the supervisors. Obviously, they had suffered a lot before. Whether it was in the northern kingdoms, the trading city-state, or other places, the human management of slaves had always been strict. They were almost not seen as different creatures and were easily hanged or whipped to death. In a short while, the port was crowded with slaves. Many older children looked up at the big ship with the black dragon flag flying. Although they might have realized something, they were at a loss and had no idea what to do. The younger children were already sobbing softly. Two children who were closer to each other were whispering. André's ears were very sharp. He could vaguely hear their whispers along with the wind of the port. "Sister, this ship has a dragon painted on it. Are they going to give us to the dragon as a gift to be eaten?" "No, this is to." "Don't worry, I'll protect you." André looked in the direction of the voice and saw a girl with tied hair and a scar on her face comforting a younger boy. At this time, the leader of the army came to his side. "Do you want to untie the chains?" Every slave had an iron chain around their neck. In addition, there were also heavy handcuffs and shackles. André thought for a moment and sighed. "Not for now. Let them board the ship. 20 silver for a pair of shackles." The leader of the army smiled and reminded him. He then signaled to his companions. The supervisors violently pushed the children onto the dock. All the disturbances caused by the uneasiness along the way were beaten up. 20 large ships, 10 merchant ships, and 10 frigates stood quietly. In front of each gangplank that led to the merchant ships, there was a wooden table. A few humans in black robes were sitting behind the table with paper and pen in their hands, waiting for the slaves to arrive. The child slaves were divided into 10 rows. They came to the table and were asked the questions that they had prepared beforehand. Then, the black-robed children were responsible for recording. The children who knew each other were separated and assigned to different ships. For example, the siblings from before. Because of this, there was another burst of crying and chaos. The process was extremely slow. The leader of the army waited for a while. Then, he frowned and asked impatiently, "Is this going to take until tomorrow? Why is it so troublesome?" André did not look at him. He stared at the slowly moving people on the deck and said, "The deal is done. These are now the private property of the North. The money has been paid to your people. If you don't want to wait, you can leave first." "Very well. I look forward to seeing you again." After hearing this, the leader of the army led his people away without hesitation. Immediately, armed personnel rushed out of the frigates to take over their task. A few orcs and flying apes flashed by, causing the slaves to panic again. "Looks like we'll have to meet again soon." André shook his head. As an imperial merchant, he had to carefully carry out the orders of the royal court. Among these slaves, the royal court was adamant that they did not want northerners. If they were not northerners, they would not have any connections in the north. An unfamiliar and helpless environment would be more conducive for the empire to control. About 40 northerners were selected. Later, André would have to go and negotiate the exchange. Emperor Black Dragon was a great dictator. He did not buy these children for his own charity. Instead, he wanted to cultivate a group of outstanding and loyal talents to serve the entire empire. Therefore, during the registration process just now, those who were related by blood, familiar with each other, and even those who had only exchanged a few words with each other were separated and assigned to different ships. They would not have any chance to interact with each other. The purpose was to make them isolated and helpless individuals who could only wait quietly for the arrival of their savior. Chapter 373. After a week-long journey at sea, the ship filled with slaves finally arrived at the port on the west coast of the Black Wing Empire. The children transported from the central trading city-states would disembark here and live in the camp arranged by the royal court. Mira could not find her brother. After disembarking from the ship, the children were strictly quarantined. She was arranged to share a room with other children of similar age. When she disembarked from the ship, she saw a terrifying scene that was unique in the central trading city-state. A mountain-like black dragon was entrenched at the dock, exactly the same as the one she saw on the ship's flag. Mira was only 14 years old this year. She had been in the trading city-states for as long as she could remember. She did not know where she was born or who her parents were, but she knew that she had a brother who she depended on. At that time, after the black-robed man on the ship finished registering, he looked at her with sympathy and ordered her to be separated from her brother completely. When she first boarded the ship, Mira was terrified. These large ships with evil dragon flags were filled with strong and powerful men. Their faces were completely different from the people of the central region, and they were all carrying sharp knives. The children who had just boarded the ship were at a loss and huddled together, but they were quickly ordered to stand properly by the adults on the ship. "Slaves of the trading city-state, your gods cannot save you. But let me tell you, from now on, your fate has changed. Thank the great Dragon King." Mira remembered the words of the man who seemed to be the leader of the trading city-state very clearly. Dragon King? Mira had never heard of this name before, nor did she know why she was thanking it. However, the moment the leader finished speaking, he ordered his men to bring the children to the canteen on the ship. The moment she entered the canteen, Mira was dumbfounded. On the solid wooden dining table that was fixed to the floor, there were large basins of bread, sausages, and fragrant meat soup. The children immediately became restless. This was a delicacy that they could only enjoy in their dreams. When it appeared in front of them, no one was not excited. The sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard. However, the strong men on the ship were not much easier to talk to than the slaves of the trading city-states. They used a thick and sturdy short stick to hit and beat the children who wanted to walk out of the line. Screams could be heard incessantly. The leader ordered them to remain silent for 15 minutes and not move for a moment. After that, the children who met the requirements were allowed to line up to receive food. Mira was one of the children who met the requirements first. She was already used to the feeling of her life being controlled by others. At this time, only by being obedient could she live a better life. When she took her food and sat down on the table, she found that no one was restricting her. She could not wait to eat. She did not care that the hot soup was scalding her mouth, and very ungracefully while stuffing bread into her mouth and gulping soup. She hoped that her brother would receive the same treatment. At that time, Mira thought that in order to prevent the food from being stolen, she stuffed all the bread into her mouth. Only then did she start chewing hard. At the same time, she had the time to observe the surroundings. At the beginning, her gaze was completely attracted by the food. Only then did she realize that there was a huge portrait hanging on the wall facing the entrance of the canteen. Mira! Myra's cheeks moved. She blinked. She found that the portrait was similar to the flag on the ship. Was this the Dragon King that the leader had mentioned before? She looked up at the dragon's huge head in a daze. Tears flowed out unconsciously. Fear and timidity filled her chest. But the warm soup in her stomach gave her a glimmer of hope. Seeing that more and more children were paying attention to the portrait in the canteen, the leader finally said loudly, "This is the master of the whole North. He is also the one who will decide your fate. The Dragon King, Emperor Caesar Tangerine." The Dragon King. On the dock, Mira looked straight at the huge figure. Like her, many children who had seen the portrait of the Black Dragon on the ship also looked up at the target with their mouths wide open. At first, they thought that they were listening to a story. But now that they saw it with their own eyes, they knew that it was real. This was not a dream. There was actually such a huge dragon in the world. Caesar had brought people to accept this batch of slaves. At the same time, he had people check the children's bodies at the dock. A few days ago, he had received Andre's report that the North had made full preparations to accept the slaves. But to be honest, 30 gold for a child slave in the trading city-state was so expensive that it made one's teeth ache. Compared to the North, the money in the trading city-state was even more worthless. Iradia had no reference standards for the construction of academies. This was because there was no similar place on this continent. Regardless of whether it was a sect or a guild, they were more like an organization of power and not a place to learn knowledge. But this did not mean that Caesar had no reference standard. He started from pragmatism, imitating Napoleon's reform of the education system in his previous life. With the core idea of providing talents for the court and the army as the core idea, he set up specialized subjects. After completing the basic subjects, they could study vocational subject. The total length of study was 6 to 9 years. Caesar did not have any requirements for the names of the academies. He simply added the word academy to the names of the academies. Thus, a series of new academies such as Rhine Academy, Kalshan Academy, Fey Academy, and so on sprung up in the North. After dealing with the matters of the academies, Caesar rushed back to the empire's court without stopping. This was because just now, in the empire's military factory, the first model of the land weapon that he had requested had finally been produced. Standing in front of the Black Dragon was a small war fortress. Its entire body was covered in thick armor. It was 1 to 2 meters taller than the tight security walls around the military factory. A long cannon barrel pointed straight ahead. There were also 6 small cannons around it. But this was not a war fortress. This was because it was moving. The ugly tail that looked like a locomotive spewing out white steam was particularly eye-catching. This was a steam tank. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 5 to 10 years for an important piece of military equipment to be produced, developed, tested, and finally equipped to the army. However, driven by Caesar's will, the Blackwing Empire's efficiency was unimaginably high. Less than 2 years after the steam furnace appeared, a prototype of the steam tank had already been produced. This steam tank was designed for orcs. It was 15 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 6 meters tall. It could carry 8 to 10 orcs. The tank was equipped with one main cannon and 6 secondary cannons. The design of the multiple turrets allowed its firepower to cover all directions. It was truly a weapon of war. However, its degree of completion was not very high. It looked very bloated. The entire structure was filled with rough marks of rivet. Although the goblins had applied an earthy yellow coating to the surface for camouflage, the gaps between the armor pieces were still very obvious. You say that this thing has already achieved initial success and can be used in battle? Caesar asked hesitantly as he looked at the steam tank that looked like it would fall apart at the slightest movement. After receiving an affirmative answer from the Red Lotus Goblin, he nodded and said, "Very well. I'll let you guys operate it. Go and get the 5 demon hounds. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.